Hello everyone and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now, let's get you comfortable and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is William Carpenter, but everyone just calls me Bill. I've been a ranger in the Monongahela National Forest for 16 years now, and before that, I spent my whole life in these West Virginia mountains. Used to work the coal mines with my brother Danny until that terrible day in 1974 when the mine collapsed. Danny didn't make it out. I did. That's when I knew I needed to do something different with my life. Being a forest ranger suited me just fine. After years underground in the dark, working above ground with trees and wildlife felt like a blessing. I specialized in managing the animals, tracking bears, counting deer herds, studying how predators behaved. At 43 years old, I figured I knew every creature that lived in these mountains. Every sound they made, every track they left, every way they hunted. The summer of 1990 was the hottest and driest anyone could remember. Day after day, the sun beat down without mercy. Streams that usually ran strong were down to little trickles. Some dried up completely. The animals were getting desperate, clustering around the few water sources that remained. I spent most of my time making sure the wildlife had enough to drink and eat. The old-timers in the mountain communities had stories about strange things happening during bad droughts like this. They'd talk about their great-grandfathers seeing a white bear back in the 1800s when the German families first settled here. Local families called it the woolly booger, something that only showed up when nature was under stress. I never paid much attention to those tales. 30 years in these mountains, and I'd seen every animal native to West Virginia. The idea of some unknown creature hiding in forests I'd mapped myself seemed impossible. Bears were the biggest predators we had, and I knew them all by name. But that June, things started feeling different. The heat was getting to everyone, animals and people alike. The logging company had been cutting deeper into the old-growth forest than usual, claiming they needed to clear damaged trees before they became fire hazards. Every day I heard their machines grinding away, cutting down trees that had stood for hundreds of years. The local farmers were worried about their livestock. With water sources drying up, they had to move their animals to new grazing areas. Some were keeping sheep and goats near the forest edge, hoping they could find stream water there. It made sense, but it also made me nervous. Desperate predators do desperate things. That's when Sally Henderson called my office on a Tuesday morning, her voice shaking so bad I could barely understand her. "Bill, you need to come out here right away. Something killed 3 of my sheep last night. And it wasn't any bear or coyote I've ever seen. This is something else entirely." Sally had been raising sheep on her family's land for 30 years. She knew predator attacks. If she said this was different, then it was different. I loaded my truck with my tracking gear and drove out to her farm, which sat right at the edge of the national forest. What I found there changed everything I thought I knew about these mountains. The 3 dead sheep lay in a neat row about 50 feet from Sally's barn. At first glance, it looked like they'd been squeezed to death. No bite marks, no claw marks, just crushed. Like something with enormous hands had grabbed each sheep and compressed it until it stopped breathing. "I heard the most awful sound last night," Sally told me, wrapping her arms around herself despite the heat. "It started like sheep bleeding, but then it turned into something that sounded almost human, like screaming. But no human could make a sound that loud." I knelt down next to the dead animals, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The bodies showed massive crushing force, but there were no obvious teeth marks. Whatever did this was incredibly strong. Then I noticed something that made my skin crawl. The grass around each dead sheep was burned in perfect circles, like someone had held a giant torch to the ground. But there was no smell of fire, no ash, nothing that suggested an actual flame, just scorched earth in neat, round patterns. I looked around for tracks and found them leading away from Sally's property toward the forest. They were unlike anything I'd ever seen. Footprints that looked almost human, but 20 inches long, with clear marks where toes and what looked like thumbs had dug into the dried dirt. The stride between prints suggested something nearly 10 feet tall, walking upright on 2 legs. Over the next week, I got 5 more calls about dead livestock. Every farm that bordered the national forest had lost animals, always sheep and goats. Never cattle, never horses, never pigs, just the woolly animals. Each kill site showed the same pattern. Animals crushed rather than torn apart, scorched grass in perfect circles, and those impossible footprints leading back into the forest. I started carrying plaster to make casts of the tracks. When I showed them to other rangers, they just shook their heads. Nobody had ever seen anything like them. The strangest part was how the attacks seemed organized. Whatever was doing this had intelligence behind it. The creature would strike at one farm, then move several miles away before hitting another property. It never attacked the same place twice. It seemed to understand human patterns and was deliberately avoiding areas where people might be waiting. Dr. Sarah Mills from the State Wildlife Office came out to examine one of my track casts. She was an expert on large predator behavior and had studied bear attacks across 3 states. After looking at the evidence for 2 hours, she pulled me aside. "Bill, this doesn't match any known animal behavior. The crushing injuries suggest something with hands rather than claws. The burn patterns don't make sense with any natural predator. And these tracks." She held up the plaster cast. "This creature has opposable thumbs." That's when Margaret Cole had her encounter. Margaret was an experienced hiker who'd been coming to our trails for 15 years. She knew how to handle herself in the woods and wasn't prone to panic. But when she stumbled into my ranger station at 8 in the evening, dirty and bleeding from scratches, she could barely speak. "It chased me for 2 miles, she gasped, accepting the water bottle I handed her. "Started at Spruce Falls, chased me all the way down to the main road. I've never seen anything move that fast." "What exactly did you see?" I asked, getting out my incident report forms. It looked like a polar bear standing on its hind legs, all white fur but thicker than bear fur, more like sheep's wool. It stood at least 10 feet tall, maybe 12. But the face, she shuddered. The face looked almost human, dark eyes that seemed way too intelligent. And when it saw me, it made this sound. What kind of sound? Like a sheep bleating, but if a sheep could scream, loud enough that birds flew out of trees a quarter mile away. I asked her to show me exactly where the encounter happened. We drove up to Spruce Falls the next morning, and I found clear evidence of the chase. Margaret's boot prints showed she'd been running flat out, and following behind were those same massive humanoid tracks. But what really got my attention was what the creature had done after Margaret escaped. A large oak tree, maybe 3 feet thick, had been pushed over. Not cut down, not broken by wind, pushed over with brute force. The root system was completely exposed, showing that something had simply grabbed the tree and tipped it onto its side. It would have taken incredible strength. Near the fallen tree, I found more of those burned grass circles. But this time, there was also a piece of metal, part of someone's camping gear, that had been twisted into an impossible shape. The aluminum had been melted and reformed like clay. Whatever was out there wasn't just strong. It could generate heat intense enough to melt metal. 2 days later, Jake Morrison went missing. Jake was a local hunter who knew these woods as well as I did. He'd gone out early morning to check his trail cameras near Seneca Rocks and never returned. His wife called me when he missed dinner. Jake was never late for meals. We organized a search party that included state police, some National Guard units on training exercises, and 20 volunteers from town. I brought tracking dogs, thinking they'd easily follow Jake's scent to wherever he'd gone. But the dogs wouldn't go into the area where Jake had parked his truck. They whined and pulled back against their leashes, acting more scared than I'd ever seen tracking dogs behave. Even when we forced them forward, they kept looking over their shoulders like something was following us. We found Jake's rifle about a mile from his truck. It had been tied into a knot like a piece of rope. The barrel was twisted in a complete circle, and the stock was wrapped around it. No human could have done that to a steel rifle barrel. No known animal could have done it either. On the third evening, we heard someone calling for help from deep in a cave system near the rocks. It was Jake, alive but barely conscious from exposure. When we pulled him out, he kept repeating the same words over and over. The white giant. The white giant kept me. After he recovered enough to talk, Jake's story sounded impossible. But Jake wasn't the kind of man who made up stories. It grabbed me from behind, he said, picked me up like I was a child, all white fur, standing upright like a man, but twice as tall. It carried me to those caves, and it wasn't trying to hurt me. It was almost like it wanted company. What do you mean? I asked. It would bring me water, roots and berries to eat. It made crude tools from sticks and stones, and it tried to communicate. Jake looked at me with wide eyes. Bill, that thing is smart, really smart. It would draw pictures in the dirt, trying to show me something about the forest. Trees being cut down, streams drying up. Like it wanted me to understand that something was wrong. Word of Jake's disappearance and rescue spread through the local communities like wildfire. The logging company decided they weren't going to let local folklore hurt their profits. They brought in a private security team, 6 men with military backgrounds who specialized in dealing with wildlife problems at industrial sites. Team leader Marcus Webb met with me at the ranger station. He was the kind of man who looked like he'd never backed down from anything in his life. We're going to hunt this animal down and eliminate the problem, he told me, spreading maps across my desk. My team has dealt with everything from rogue bears in Alaska to escaped circus animals in Texas. One oversized mountain creature won't be an issue. This isn't just a large predator, I warned him. It shows human-level intelligence and capabilities no normal animal possesses. Webb laughed. There's no such thing as a supernatural animal. If it bleeds, we can kill it. They headed into the forest that evening with night vision equipment, tranquilizer guns, and enough firepower to stop a charging elephant. They came back 6 hours later. 3 of the 6 men were missing, and the remaining 3 looked like they'd seen hell itself. We found it, Webb whispered, standing in a clearing 12 feet tall, covered in white fur that seemed to glow in our night vision. When it saw us, it started generating heat. Not fire, just heat. The air around it began shimmering. Our equipment started malfunctioning. Gun barrels got too hot to hold. What happened to the other 3 men? It grabbed Johnson first, just reached out and touched him on the shoulder. Johnson's tactical vest started smoking immediately. The fabric began melting against his skin. The creature picked him up and carried him away into the trees. The missing men were found alive the next day in the same cave system where Jake had been held. All three suffered from severe burns, but only on their clothing and equipment. Their actual skin was untouched. Their tactical gear had been completely melted, but their bodies showed no heat damage whatsoever. "It's impossible," Dr. Jennifer Walsh told me at the hospital. "These men were exposed to temperatures hot enough to melt synthetic fabrics and metal components, but they don't even have first-degree burns." The Pentagon got involved after that. Federal researchers arrived with equipment I'd never seen before. They called themselves environmental specialists, but their gear looked more military than scientific. Dr. Alan Foster, the team leader, seemed particularly interested in the heat generation capability. If this creature can generate temperatures over 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit without harming itself, it represents a completely unknown biological process. That night, the logging operation lost their first piece of major equipment. The operator, a man named Steve Duncan, was found the next morning inside his bulldozer. The machine had been melted from the inside out, the steel cab twisted into impossible shapes. Duncan was still alive, showing no burn injuries despite being inside what had essentially become a steel furnace. "It stood right in front of my dozer," Duncan whispered when he regained consciousness. 12 feet tall, arms spread wide, like it was trying to protect the trees behind it. When I didn't stop, it placed its hands on the hood of my machine. The metal started glowing red hot immediately, but somehow the heat didn't reach me. That thing saved my life while it destroyed my machine. The Seneca elder Robert Cornplanter asked to speak with me after hearing about the latest incident. We met at his cabin on the reservation. "My grandfather called it Genwakshash, the fire spirit that protects the mountain's life force," he said. "The stories say it only appears when the forest is dying, when too much damage threatens the balance of life. Why doesn't it just kill the loggers directly? Because that's not its purpose. The spirit doesn't want to harm people, it wants to heal the land. But it will defend the forest with increasing force until the threat stops." That same evening, Steve Duncan died. His body temperature began rising uncontrollably in the hospital. His internal temperature reached 107 degrees before his organs failed. He died from hyperthermia generated from within his own body. Duncan's death changed everything. The creature was no longer just protecting the forest. It was starting to kill people. Apex Logging brought in professional big game hunters with orders to track down and eliminate the threat. That night, I made a decision that would change my life forever. I was going to find the creature myself and try to communicate with it before the hunters arrived. I gathered my camping gear and drove to the trailhead near Seneca Rocks, where Jake Morrison had first encountered it. As I hiked into the darkening forest, the temperature dropped despite the summer heat. The air smelled different too, metallic and charged, like the atmosphere before a lightning storm. I was about to meet something that challenged everything I thought I knew about the natural world. I found the creature at the headwaters of Seneca Creek, where the drought had reduced the once flowing stream to a series of muddy pools. It was waiting for me. Standing 12 feet tall at the edge of the water, covered in thick white fur that seemed to absorb the moonlight, the sheep squatch looked exactly like the witnesses had described. But seeing it in person was completely different from hearing about it. The presence of the creature filled the clearing with an energy that made the hair on my arms stand up. Its eyes were the most startling feature. Dark, intelligent, and utterly human in expression. When it looked at me, I felt like it was seeing straight through to my soul. "I'm not here to hurt you," I said aloud. "I want to understand." The creature tilted its head, studying me. Then it began to generate heat. The air around it started shimmering, but instead of becoming unbearable, the heat felt welcoming, like sitting near a fireplace on a winter evening. Then something extraordinary happened. Images began forming in my mind. Not my own thoughts, but pictures being shared directly from the creature's consciousness. I saw the forest as it had been hundreds of years ago, pristine and untouched, with clear streams and towering trees. I saw the gradual changes over decades: early logging, mining operations, roads carved through ancient groves. And I felt the creature's pain with each tree that fell, each stream that was polluted, each animal that lost its habitat. The sheep squatch wasn't just an animal protecting its territory. It was somehow connected to every living thing in the forest. When trees died, it felt their death. When streams dried up, it experienced thirst. When wildlife suffered, it shared their pain. "You're dying," I said, understanding flooding through me. "The forest is dying, and you're dying with it." The creature nodded, a completely human gesture. Then it shared more images, visions of what would happen if the logging continued. Entire mountainsides stripped bare, streams completely dry, wildlife populations collapsing. And finally, the creature itself fading away as its connection to the ecosystem was severed forever. "How can I help?" I asked. The sheep squatch pointed toward the sound of machinery in the distance. Apex had brought in their replacement equipment overnight and was starting a new cutting operation. The creature's message was clear. The immediate threat had to be stopped. Then I heard vehicles approaching through the forest. Multiple engines, moving fast, coming from different directions. The hunting team had arrived, and they were converging on our location. 6 vehicles surrounded the clearing, spotlights blazing. 20 armed men emerged, led by a professional hunter named Carl Brennan, who'd been hired specifically to track and kill dangerous wildlife. "There it is," Brennan shouted, raising an enormous rifle. "Remember, this thing generates extreme heat, so maintain distance." "Don't shoot," I yelled, stepping between the hunters and the creature. "This isn't just an animal. It's trying to protect the forest." "Step away, Ranger Carpenter," Brennan ordered. "That thing has already killed 1 man." Behind me, I could feel the sheep squatch's heat building to dangerous levels. The air was becoming thick and shimmery. The lead hunter fired a tranquilizer dart at the creature. The sheep squatch roared, that same sound of bleating sheep transforming into human screaming. But at close range, the volume was incredible. Windows in the vehicles shattered. Men dropped their weapons to cover their ears. Then the creature released all the heat it had been building. The temperature in the clearing jumped to over 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit in seconds. Synthetic clothing began smoking. Metal weapon parts became too hot to touch. But despite the extreme heat radiating from its body, I remained untouched in a bubble of cool air. The hunters opened fire with their backup weapons. Bullets struck the creature but seemed to have no effect. Then one of the vehicle's gas tanks, superheated by the creature's proximity, exploded. The blast sent flaming debris flying across the clearing. One burning chunk landed near a grove of drought-stressed pine trees. Within seconds, those trees were on fire. The sheep squatch saw the flames spreading into the forest and let out another roar, this one filled with anguish. It had been trying to protect these trees, and now its own defensive heat had caused them to burn. The creature raised its arms toward the sky, and lightning began striking the clearing. Not normal lightning, but bolts of energy that seemed to originate from the creature itself. Each strike hit one of the vehicles, and within minutes, Every piece of metal equipment was either melted or destroyed. But the forest fire was spreading. Despite its incredible abilities, the creature couldn't fight both human attackers and runaway flames at the same time. "I'll help you stop the fire," I called out, "but you have to let the hunters leave." The sheep squatch looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. The lightning stopped immediately. The temperature began dropping back to normal levels, and in the distance, I could hear the hunters' vehicles starting up as they retreated. Now it was just me and the creature, working together to save the forest that meant everything to both of us. The sheep squatch and I fought the fire through the night using methods I never could have imagined. The creature used its heat control abilities to create fire breaks, superheating the ground in strategic lines to create barriers the flames couldn't cross. When that wasn't enough, it generated localized thunderstorms, calling down rain to douse the worst burning areas. I worked alongside it, using my knowledge of forest management to direct its efforts toward the most critical areas. Together, we saved over 90% of the old growth trees that had been threatened. During those hours working together, I learned something that changed my entire understanding of what the creature was. The sheep squatch wasn't just an animal that lived in the forest. It was the forest, in a way I couldn't fully explain. Every tree, every stream, every living thing in the ecosystem was part of a larger organism, and the creature was its physical manifestation. "What do you need from me?" I asked it directly. More images flowed into my mind. I saw legal documents, government officials, environmental protection orders. The creature understood human bureaucracy well enough to know that lasting protection required more than just frightening away loggers. Over the following weeks, I became the creature's advocate in the human world. Using evidence I'd gathered, thermal readings, photographs, testimonies from witnesses, I built a case for permanent environmental protection of the Monongahela's old growth areas. 6 months after my encounter with the sheep squatch, the federal government declared 50,000 acres of old growth forest permanently protected from logging, mining, and development. The Seneca Creek watershed was designated as critical habitat. The creature's attacks stopped immediately after the protection orders took effect. It was as if the sheep squatch had simply vanished once its mission was accomplished. But I knew it was still there. In my role as chief ranger for the newly protected areas, I had developed an unusual sensitivity to the forest's condition. I could sense when illegal hunting was occurring, when streams were being polluted, when any significant threat emerged. Sometimes during quiet evenings in the forest, I would feel a presence nearby. Not threatening, just watching, protecting. The sheep squatch was still connected to every tree and stream, but it no longer needed to manifest physically. The forest was healing. 20 years later, the protected forest areas are healthier than they've been in over a century. Streams run clear and full even during dry summers. Wildlife populations have recovered to levels not seen since the 1800s. I've never seen the sheep squatch again, but I know it's there. On still nights, when I'm camping in the deepest parts of the forest, I sometimes hear that distinctive sound. Sheep, bleating that transforms into something almost like singing. It's no longer a cry of anguish or warning. Now it sounds like contentment. The mountains are at peace, and so is the ancient spirit that guards them. My name is Samuel Hartford, but everyone just calls me Sam. I've been a forest ranger for 11 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these North Carolina mountains could throw at me. Boy, was I wrong. It was January 1954, and the worst winter anyone could remember had settled over the Uwharrie Mountains like a heavy blanket. Snow covered everything for weeks. The temperature hadn't gone above freezing in so long that even the old-timers were worried. Animals were starving and desperate creatures do desperate things. I'd been walking these forest paths since 1953, after I got back from the war. World War II changed me in ways I'm still figuring out. I'd worked in the textile mills before that, but after seeing what I saw in Europe, I needed something different, something peaceful. The forest seemed like the right place to heal. My job was simple enough: protect the wildlife, help lost hikers, and deal with problem animals. That last part kept me plenty busy. When animals get hungry enough, they'll come after livestock, and the farmers around here don't take kindly to that. I lived in a small cabin about 10 miles from the nearest town. It wasn't much, but it was mine. On cold nights like these, I'd sit by the fire and listen to the wind howl through the trees. Sometimes I'd hear other sounds too, animals calling to each other, branches creaking, the normal sounds of a forest at night. But lately, those sounds had been different, wrong somehow. Even my dog, Rex, had been acting strange. He'd growl at nothing and refuse to go outside after dark. Rex was a tough German shepherd who'd never been scared of anything, so when he started hiding under my bed, I knew something wasn't right. The local folks had been talking too. Old stories about things that hunted in these hills when times got hard. The Cherokee who lived here before us had legends about a shadow cat that came out during the lean times. Most people laughed at those stories, but the old-timers remembered their grandparents telling them to stay inside when the shadow cat was hunting. I didn't put much stock in ghost stories. I'd seen enough real monsters during the war, the kind that walked on 2 legs and wore uniforms. The idea of some supernatural cat prowling around North Carolina seemed like nonsense compared to what humans could do to each other. That all changed on a Tuesday morning when Clarence Moore came knocking on my door. Clarence was a good man who ran a small sheep farm about 5 miles south of my cabin. He was usually calm and steady, but when I opened my door that morning, his face was white as the snow on my porch. "Sam," he said, his voice shaky, "you need to come see this. Something killed my sheep last night, all of them." I grabbed my coat and boots. Losing livestock was serious business for farmers like Clarence. Every animal meant money, and money was hard to come by in these mountains. The drive to his farm was quiet, except for the crunch of snow under my truck tires. Clarence sat next to me, staring out the window and wringing his hands. "Never seen anything like it," he mumbled, "not in 30 years of farming." When we got to his farm, I understood why he was so upset. 12 sheep lay scattered around his pasture, but they weren't torn apart like you'd expect from a dog pack or coyotes. They just looked like they were sleeping, except they were all dead. I knelt down next to the closest one and checked it over. There were 2 small holes in its neck, like someone had stuck it with a big needle. But the strangest part was that the sheep had been drained completely of blood. The ground around them should have been red with it, but there wasn't a drop anywhere. "Clarence," I said, standing up and brushing snow off my knees, "have you ever seen anything like this before?" He shook his head. "Never. And Sam, there's something else. Look at those tracks." I followed where Clarence was pointing and felt my blood run cold. In the snow were paw prints, but they were huge, bigger than any mountain lion track I'd ever seen. Each print was the size of my hand, and they were spaced so far apart that whatever made them had to be moving impossibly fast. The tracks led from the tree line to the sheep, then back into the forest. But here's what really bothered me. They just stopped. Right in the middle of the pasture, the tracks ended like whatever made them had just vanished into thin air. I called Doc Mitchell to come look at one of the sheep, Clarence said. She should be here soon. Dr. Sarah Mitchell was the local veterinarian, and if anyone could figure out what had killed these animals, it would be her. While we waited, I followed the tracks as far as I could. They led me to a big oak tree at the edge of the pasture, and that's where I found something that made my skin crawl. 12 feet up the trunk were claw marks, deep gouges in the bark that went down about 2 feet. Whatever had made them was strong enough to tear through solid oak like it was paper. "Sam," Clarence called from behind me. "Doc's here." Dr. Mitchell was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who'd seen just about every kind of animal injury you could imagine. She spent about 20 minutes examining the dead sheep, and when she was done, her face was troubled. "Well?" I asked. "Those puncture wounds in the neck are from fangs," she said, "but they're bigger than anything we have around here. A mountain lion's fangs are maybe an inch long. These wounds suggest fangs that are at least 3 inches. "What could do that?" Clarence asked. Doc Mitchell shook her head. "Nothing that lives in North Carolina, and the blood loss is complete. Every drop is gone. I've never seen anything like it." As we stood there talking, Jake Wilson, Clarence's neighbor, came trudging through the snow toward us. Jake was a tough old farmer who'd lived in these mountains his whole life. "Heard you had trouble, Clarence," he said. Then he looked at the dead sheep and let out a low whistle. "Well, I'll be. Looks like the Shadow Cat's back." "Shadow Cat?" I asked. "Old Cherokee legend," Jake said. "My grandmother used to tell stories about it. Big black panther that shows up every 20 years or so when the winter gets bad. Feeds on blood instead of meat." "Come on, Jake," I said. "You don't really believe that." Jake looked at me seriously. "You seen any other explanation for this, Sam?" "Because I saw something last night that I can't explain any other way." "What did you see?" Dr. Mitchell asked. "I was checking on my cattle around 10 o'clock, and I saw this black shape moving through the trees. At first I thought it was just shadows, but then it jumped. Sam, that thing cleared 20 feet between 2 trees like it was nothing, and it was big, big as a horse." "You sure it wasn't just a trick of the light?" I asked. "I know what I saw," Jake said firmly, "and I've been telling my family to stay inside after dark until this thing moves on." After Dr. Mitchell and Jake left, I spent another hour at Clarence's farm, looking for any clue that might explain what had happened. But the more I looked, the less sense it made. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound outside my cabin made me jump. Rex refused to leave my side, and he kept whining at the windows like he could sense something out there. Around midnight, I heard it, a sound I'd never heard before. It was like a cross between a growl and a scream, coming from somewhere deep in the forest. Rex started shaking and tried to hide under my bed. I grabbed my flashlight and rifle and stepped out onto my porch. The sound came again, closer this time. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, but all I could see were trees and snow. Then I saw the eyes. About 50 yards away, 2 red spots glowed in the darkness. They were too high off the ground to be a normal animal, maybe 6 feet up, and they were watching me. I raised my rifle and called out, "What are you?" The eyes blinked once, and then they were gone. No sound of movement, no rustling in the bushes. They just disappeared. I stood on that porch for another hour, but I didn't see anything else. When I finally went back inside, my hands were shaking so bad I could barely lock the door. The next morning, I found tracks in my yard. The same massive paw prints I'd seen at Clarence's farm, leading right up to my porch and then away into the forest. Whatever had made them had been close enough to touch my front door. Over the next week, 3 more farms reported the exact same kind of attacks. The Johnson place lost 8 cattle. The Williams family found their horses dead in their stalls. Every time it was the same story. Animals drained of blood with no other damage. I started keeping a map of the attacks, marking each location with a red pin. The pattern formed a rough circle about 10 miles across, and my cabin was right in the middle of it. The state police got involved after the 4th attack. They brought in dogs to track whatever was doing this, but the hounds wouldn't follow the trail. They'd get to the edge of the forest, start whimpering, and refuse to go any further. That's when I started doing some research at the local library. I spent hours looking through old newspapers and records, and what I found made my blood run cold. Every 20 years or so, going back to 1889, there had been reports of the same kind of killings. Always during the worst part of winter, always lasting exactly 1 month. The newspapers called it different things: mystery predator, unknown beast, devil cat. But the details were always the same. Mrs. Henderson, the librarian, was an elderly Cherokee woman whose family had lived in these mountains for generations. When I asked her about the old stories, she got very serious. My great-grandmother called it the shadow walker, she said quietly. It comes when the balance is broken, when the land is hurt and the animals are suffering. It's not just hunting for food, Sam. It's hunting to restore the natural order. What does that mean? I asked. It means someone has to pay for the damage, she said, and it won't stop until the debt is settled. I was starting to think maybe these old stories weren't so crazy after all, especially after what happened to Pete Davidson. Pete was a local hunter who knew these woods better than anyone. He'd been tracking the creature for 3 days when we found him unconscious near Bear Creek, about 2 miles from where the latest attack had happened. When Pete woke up in the hospital, he was as white as a sheet and weak as a newborn kitten. The doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong with him. His blood count was dangerously low, but there wasn't a mark on him. "It touched me," Pete whispered when I went to visit him. "The shadow cat. It put its paw on my chest, and I felt my life being pulled right out of me." "What did it look like?" I asked. "Biggest cat I ever seen," he said. "Black as midnight, with red eyes that looked right into my soul. And Sam, the strangest thing, I could feel what it was feeling, like our minds were connected somehow." Pete's condition got worse over the next few days. He started having visions, seeing through the creature's eyes as it hunted. He'd wake up screaming about being in dark forests, stalking prey, feeling an endless hunger. That's when the National Guard showed up. Governor Luther Hodges had finally decided this was serious enough to call in the military. 50 soldiers with trucks, helicopters, and enough firepower to stop a small army. I tried to tell the commanding officer, Colonel Barnes, that this wasn't something you could fight with bullets, but he laughed at me. "Son," he said, "I've been hunting dangerous animals all over the world. Whatever this thing is, we'll put it down." They set up checkpoints all around the area and started patrol sweeps through the forest. For 2 days, everything was quiet. The colonel thought they'd scared the creature away. Then Private Johnson was found dead at checkpoint 3. He was sitting upright in his chair like he'd fallen asleep on duty, but when they tried to wake him up, they realized he was dead. Same as the animals, completely drained of blood with 2 small puncture wounds in his neck. The really scary part was that the other soldiers at the checkpoint never heard anything. No sounds of struggle, no cries for help. 1 minute Johnson was alive and alert. The next, he was dead. Colonel Barnes wasn't laughing anymore. The attacks started happening every night after that. Not just animals now, but people too. A farmer named Bill Tucker disappeared from his own kitchen while his wife was washing dishes in the next room. They found his body in the morning, arranged peacefully in his cornfield like he'd just laid down to take a nap. Dr. Robert Kim, a zoologist from the University of North Carolina, came to study the creature with special cameras and scientific equipment. He set up camp near where most of the attacks had been happening, determined to get proof of what we were dealing with. The photos his cameras captured changed everything. They showed a massive black cat, at least 6 feet long, with glowing red eyes and fangs that looked more like a saber-toothed tiger than anything that should exist today. But the strangest part was how the creature looked at the cameras. In every photo, it was staring directly at the lens, like it knew it was being watched and didn't care. Dr. Kim's electronic equipment started picking up strange readings around the attack sites. Electromagnetic distortions that suggested the creature existed partially outside normal space and time. "This is impossible," he told me the night before he died. "According to everything we know about physics, this creature shouldn't be able to exist. But here it is, captured on film." They found Dr. Kim's body the next morning in his research tent. Like the others, he'd been drained of blood, but his body was arranged differently. His arms were crossed over his chest, and there were strange symbols scratched in the dirt around him. Cherokee symbols that Mrs. Henderson later told me meant balance restored. That's when I knew this thing wasn't just some unknown animal. It was something else entirely, something that thought and planned and had a purpose beyond simple hunting. And somehow, I knew it was coming for me next. The dreams started 3 nights after Dr. Kim died. I'd fall asleep and suddenly be running through the forest on 4 legs, seeing the world through red-tinted eyes. I could smell fear on the wind and feel an ancient hunger burning in my chest. When I woke up, I'd know exactly where the creature had been and what it had done. The dreams were so real that I started marking the locations on my map, and every morning, the reports would come in confirming what I'd seen. Mrs. Henderson came to visit me on the 4th day. She found me sitting on my porch, staring at the forest with my rifle across my knees. "It's calling to you," she said, settling into the chair next to me. "I know," I said. "I can feel it getting stronger every night." "My great-grandmother told stories about this," she said. "The shadow walker chooses someone to communicate with, someone who can understand its purpose." "What purpose?" I asked, though I was starting to suspect I already knew. "The mining," she said quietly. "The clear-cutting. The new roads they're planning to build through the sacred places. The land is crying out, and the shadow walker has come to answer." I thought about the maps I'd seen in the county office, the plans for strip mining operations that would tear up thousands of acres of forest. I thought about the Cherokee burial grounds that would be destroyed and the animals that would lose their homes. "What does it want from me?" I asked. "To make you choose," she said, "between your duty to the human world and your responsibility to the natural world." That night, I didn't even try to sleep. I loaded my rifle, filled a backpack with supplies, and headed into the forest. If the creature wanted to communicate with me, I'd meet it on its own terms. The dreams had shown me where to go. An old Cherokee village site about 5 miles deep in the woods, where stone foundations still poked through the snow. As I walked, I could feel something following me, staying just out of sight but always watching. I reached the village ruins just as the moon was setting. The forest was completely silent. No wind, no animal sounds, nothing. Even my footsteps seemed muffled. Then it stepped out of the shadows. The photos hadn't done it justice. The creature was massive, easily the size of a small horse, with sleek black fur that seemed to absorb light. Its red eyes glowed like coals in the darkness, and when it opened its mouth, I could see fangs as long as my fingers. But the most unsettling thing was its eyes. They looked human, intelligent and aware in a way that no animal's eyes should be. "You're the Shadow Walker," I said, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. The creature tilted its head, and suddenly my mind was flooded with images. I saw the forest as it used to be, thick and untouched, full of life. I saw Cherokee families living in harmony with the land, taking only what they needed. Then I saw the destruction, trees cut down by the thousands, mountains torn apart for coal, streams poisoned by runoff. I felt the pain of the earth itself, crying out for justice. "You're not just a predator," I said, understanding flooding through me. "You're a guardian." The images changed, showing me the plans for new mining operations, the roads that would cut through sacred burial grounds, the strip pits that would destroy entire ecosystems. The creature's anger washed over me like a wave, ancient and terrible. Then I saw what it wanted from me. "You want me to stop them," I said, "to protect this place." The creature moved closer, and I could feel its power radiating from it like heat from a fire. It reached out with one massive paw and gently touched my chest. The contact sent electricity through my entire body. Suddenly, I could hear everything. The heartbeat of every animal for miles around, the slow growth of trees, the whisper of water moving through underground streams. I was connected to the entire forest, feeling its pain and its need. But with the connection came a price. I could feel my own life force being drawn out, feeding the creature's supernatural existence. I was aging years in seconds, my hair turning gray, my back beginning to stoop. "If I help you," I gasped, "what happens to me?" More images flooded my mind. I saw myself as the creature's human agent, using my position as a ranger to protect the forest from those who would destroy it. I would have supernatural abilities, the power to communicate with animals, to sense threats from miles away, to influence the natural world. But I would no longer be fully human. I would be something in between, bound to the forest for the rest of my life. The creature stepped back, waiting for my answer. I thought about my old life, the simple job, the quiet cabin, the normal human concerns. Then I thought about what would happen if I said no. The mining would continue, the forest would be destroyed, and the Shadow Walker would keep killing until someone listened. I thought about the war, about all the destruction I'd seen human beings cause. Maybe it was time to choose a different side. "I'll do it," I said. The creature's eyes flared brighter, and it touched my forehead with its nose. Power flowed into me like lightning, changing every cell in my body. I could feel my senses expanding, my connection to the natural world growing stronger. When it was over, I was no longer just Samuel Hartford, forest ranger. I was something new, a bridge between the human world and the wild, with the power to protect what couldn't protect itself. The Shadow Walker began to fade, becoming translucent like smoke. But before it disappeared completely, it showed me one last image, the mining company's equipment sitting unguarded at their base camp, waiting for someone to make sure it never operated again. I spent the next 3 days sabotaging every piece of mining equipment in a 50-mile radius. My new abilities made it easy. I could move through the forest without making a sound, see in complete darkness, and sense when humans were nearby. The mining company tried to bring in new equipment, but that kept breaking down too. After 2 weeks and hundreds of thousands of dollars in damaged machinery, they gave up and moved their operations to another state. The official reports blamed mechanical failures and said the area wasn't suitable for mining after all. Nobody questioned why all the equipment had failed at once, or why the failure rate was so much higher in this particular forest. The Shadow Walkers' killing spree ended the day the mining company left. The official military report said they'd successfully eliminated a rabid mountain lion, and the case was closed. I didn't contradict their story. Colonel Barnes came to thank me personally for my help in tracking the animal. He had no idea that I was the reason it had stopped killing. "Glad we could put this business behind us," he said, shaking my hand. "You ever think about joining the military, son? We could use someone with your woodland skills." I smiled and told him I was happy being a forest ranger. It was true enough, even if my job description had changed considerably. Pete Davidson recovered completely once the creature disappeared. The connection between them was broken, and he had no memory of the visions he'd experienced. He went back to hunting, though he never ventured very deep into the forest anymore. My own transformation wasn't visible to other people, but I could feel it every day. I could sense when deer were being hunted by poachers from miles away. I knew when storms were coming 3 days before they hit. Birds would land on my shoulders and tell me about forest fires before the smoke was even visible. The Shadow Walker was still out there, I knew. Sometimes on very quiet nights I could feel its presence watching over the forest. It was waiting, ready to return if the balance was threatened again. The government ended up giving the Uwharrie Mountains additional federal protection, making it much harder for mining companies to operate in the area. I may have had something to do with the reports that convinced them to take that action. I kept my ranger job, but now I was protecting more than just hikers and wildlife. I was guarding an ancient contract between the human world and something much older and more powerful. People sometimes ask me if I ever regret my choice. The truth is, I sleep better now than I have since the war. For the first time in my life, I'm fighting for something I truly believe in. And on cold winter nights, when the wind howls through the trees and the shadows seem to move on their own, I remember that some things are worth becoming a monster to protect. My name is Samuel Hartford, and I'm still a forest ranger. But I'm also something else now, something the Cherokee would recognize, even if the government wouldn't understand. I'm the guardian of the Uwharrie Mountains, and I'll keep that promise until my dying day. My name is David McKinnon, but everyone calls me Dave. I've been a park ranger at Chestnut Ridge State Park in Pennsylvania for 13 years now, since 1969. Before that, I worked in the steel mills in Pittsburgh. That all changed when an accident at the plant killed 3 of my friends. After watching what industrial machines could do to human bodies, I needed something different, something cleaner. The mountains called to me, so I packed up my life and moved to Chestnut Ridge, where the air was fresh and the only sounds were wind through trees and water running over rocks. I thought I'd seen the worst of what life could throw at a person. I was wrong. October 1982 was beautiful that year. The leaves had turned every color you could imagine: bright reds, deep oranges, golden yellows. Tourists came from all over to see our fall colors. But I knew something they didn't. October was when strange things happened on the ridge. Always had been, according to the old-timers. The Pennsylvania Dutch settlers who first came here in the 1700s told stories about a white devil that lived in the caves. The Native Americans who lived here before them had their own stories. They said the ridge was cursed during certain moon phases. Smart people stayed away when the moon was dark. I didn't believe any of that nonsense. After seeing what industrial accidents could do to human bodies, the idea of some glowing cave monster seemed pretty tame. I figured it was just reflected light playing tricks on people's eyes. Our cave systems at Chestnut Ridge are something special. Miles and miles of tunnels snake through the limestone, some mapped, some not. Laurel Caverns is the biggest, a massive underground world that we still don't fully understand. Parts of it have been there since before people walked the earth. I specialized in cave rescue. It was my job to know every tunnel, every drop, every dangerous spot where someone could get hurt or lost. In 13 years, I'd pulled dozens of people out of those caves. Broken legs, twisted ankles, panic attacks in the dark. I'd seen it all. The temperature was dropping fast that October. Weather reports warned about early frost. The caves stayed at a steady 55 degrees year-round, but the temperature difference between inside and outside could play tricks on you. Made you see things that weren't there. Made you hear voices in the echo. That's what I thought was happening when the first reports came in about a glowing figure in Laurel Caverns. Hikers claimed they saw something white moving through the darkness, too big to be human. Local newspapers ran the stories, but I knew better. 40 years of living near these mountains had taught me that people's imaginations ran wild in October. I should have listened to those stories. Should have paid attention to the way animals acted strange that month, how they avoided certain parts of the forest. Should have noticed how my radio crackled with static near the cave entrances, how my compass needle spun like a top. But I didn't. I was practical, scientific. I believed in things I could touch and measure and prove. That kind of thinking works great in the daylight. In the deep caves where darkness swallows light and sounds bounce off walls in ways that don't make sense, practical thinking can get you killed. The call came in on October 15th, just after dawn. 3 college kids from the University of Pittsburgh had gone into Laurel Caverns 2 days before. They were experienced spelunkers, had all the right gear, followed all the right safety rules. They were supposed to be back by Thursday evening. It was now Saturday morning, and nobody had heard from them. Emergency rescue protocol kicked in as soon as the report hit my desk. Missing persons in the cave system was serious business. People could die down there, from falls, from getting lost, from hypothermia. We had 48 hours at most before hope started running out. I gathered my rescue team, 4 good people who knew the caves almost as well as I did. We checked our gear twice: ropes, lights, first aid supplies, communication equipment. Everything had to be perfect. One mistake underground could turn a rescue mission into a recovery operation. The entrance to Laurel Caverns looked normal that morning, just a dark opening in the limestone, like the mouth of some sleeping giant. But as soon as we stepped inside, I knew something was wrong. The air felt different, warmer. My thermometer read 75 degrees, 20 degrees higher than normal. In 13 years of cave rescue, I'd never seen temperature readings like that. Equipment malfunction, I told my team. But when I checked the backup thermometer, it showed the same impossible reading. We found their gear scattered through the main chamber like someone had thrown it around in a rage. Helmet lights were still working, casting crazy shadows on the cave walls, but they'd been abandoned in random spots. These were experienced cavers. They would never leave their lights behind. Jennifer, Michael, Robert. Our voices echoed through the tunnels, bouncing off walls and coming back distorted. But mixed in with our echoes, we heard other voices, fainter ones, calling for help from somewhere deeper in the cave system. My compass needle spun in circles. GPS couldn't get a signal this far underground, but the backup navigation equipment was going crazy too. Magnetic interference, maybe, but I'd never seen anything like it. We followed the voices deeper into the cave, past the tourist areas, past the mapped sections. The walls here were covered with strange drawings, stick figures and symbols that looked old, really old. I'd seen similar markings in other caves, but these seemed to glow faintly in our lights. That's when we found the footprints. They were pressed deep into the mud of the cave floor, human-shaped, but huge. 18 inches long, with elongated toes that ended in what looked like claw marks. Whatever made them was big, much bigger than any person. Bear prints, suggested Tommy, one of my team members. But he didn't sound convinced, and I didn't blame him. Bears didn't make prints like that. Nothing did. Our lights started acting strange as we went deeper. The beams would hit the cave walls and create shadow patterns that didn't make sense. For a split second, I could swear I saw the outline of a tall figure moving through solid rock. But when I looked directly at the spot, nothing was there. "Did you see that?" whispered Sarah, our medical specialist. "See what?" But I had seen it. We all had. The voices kept calling from ahead, leading us through passages I'd never mapped. The cave system was bigger than we'd thought. Much bigger. Tunnels branched off in directions that shouldn't exist according to our surveys. We found Jennifer Walsh in a chamber so deep I wasn't sure we could find our way back. She was alive, sitting against the cave wall with her knees pulled up to her chest. But she wouldn't respond to us. Wouldn't even look at us. Just stared ahead with empty eyes. Her skin was covered with burns. Chemical burns, like she'd been splashed with acid. But there were no acidic substances in these caves. Nothing that could cause injuries like that. "Jennifer, can you hear me?" Sarah knelt beside her, checking her pulse. "We're here to help." Jennifer's skin had strange patterns on it, swirling lines that almost seemed to pulse with light. They matched some of the drawings on the cave walls. As we watched, the patterns grew brighter, then dimmer, like they were breathing. When we checked her with our radiation detector, the needle stayed steady. No radiation. But her injuries looked exactly like radiation poisoning. "We need to get her out of here," Sarah said. "Fast." But as we prepared to carry Jennifer back to the surface, we heard a new sound echoing through the caves. Not voices this time. Footsteps, heavy ones, coming from the darkness beyond our lights. Something was down here with us. Something that had hurt Jennifer Walsh and taken her friends. Something that was getting closer. We found Michael Torres in the next tunnel over. Unlike Jennifer, he was awake and moving around. But when we called to him, he answered in a language none of us recognized. Not Spanish, not any Native American dialect I'd heard. Something older. Michael had been studying archaeology at the university. Smart kid, spoke 3 languages. Now he babbled in sounds that hurt to listen to, like the words were scraping against the inside of my skull. He'd drawn patterns all over the cave walls with his fingertips, geometric shapes that seemed to shift and move when I wasn't looking directly at them. The drawings matched others we'd found deeper in the system, ancient ones that looked like they'd been there for thousands of years. "Michael, it's Dave McKinnon from Park Rescue," I said slowly. "We're here to help." He stopped drawing and looked at me. For a moment, his eyes cleared. "The Guardian," he whispered in English. "It's been waiting so long." Then he went back to his impossible language and his moving drawings. Sarah checked him over. Same strange burns as Jennifer, same glowing patterns under the skin. But Michael's patterns were brighter, more complex. Whatever was happening to them, it was getting worse. We tried to lead them both toward the surface, but Jennifer collapsed after 50 yards. The glowing patterns on her skin flared up like warning lights, and she screamed, not in English, in the same impossible language Michael was using. The cave temperature kept climbing, 80 degrees, 85. Our equipment readings made no sense. Compass needles spun faster. Radio static filled with voices speaking in that ancient tongue. That's when I saw it clearly for the first time. The figure stepped out of solid rock like it was made of water. 8 feet tall, humanoid but wrong in every detail. Its skin glowed with the same pale light as the patterns on Jennifer and Michael. Where it touched the cave walls, handprints of light remained, pulsing like heartbeats. The thing looked at me, into me. Images flooded my head, not my thoughts, but someone else's, something else's. Pictures of vast underground cities, of a civilization that had lived in the caves for thousands of years, while humans struggled with fire and stone tools above. Cities of light in the eternal darkness. People who had evolved beyond the need for sun or surface air. A whole world that existed in the spaces between spaces, in the deep places where time moved differently. And then the destruction. Surface dwellers with fire and steel, collapsing tunnels, flooding chambers, poisoning the air with smoke and chemicals. A genocide that happened so long ago it had become legend, become myth. The last survivor. Alone for centuries, waiting in the deep places, growing more desperate with each passing year. The images stopped. The figure, the white thing the old stories warned about, stood 20 feet away, watching us with eyes like pale stars. It spoke without moving its mouth. The words formed directly in my mind. So long alone, so long in the dark. Need companionship, need family. You will stay, you will learn, you will become. "Where's Robert Chen?" I managed to ask. My voice came out as a croak. The thing tilted its head. Learning, changing, becoming suitable. Soon ready for the deep places. Behind us, new passages had appeared in the cave walls. Passages that led down, always down, into parts of the mountain that shouldn't exist. The white thing was sealing the ways back to the surface, trapping us in its underground world. Time moved strangely down there. My watch showed different times every time I looked at it. Radio check-ins with the surface happened at impossible intervals. When I tried to call for backup, only static answered. We were on our own, hundreds of feet underground, with something that could walk through solid rock and change the shape of the cave system at will. Something that had been alone for so long it was willing to transform human beings rather than face another century of solitude. The radiation detectors finally started clicking, not from any substance we could identify, but from the white thing itself. It was poisoning us just by being near us. Our hair started falling out. Our skin began to burn. And somewhere in the deepest part of the caves, Robert Chen was changing into something that could survive down here. Something that could keep the last guardian of an extinct civilization company in the endless dark. We found Robert Chen in a cathedral-sized chamber that hadn't been there on any of our maps. The walls curved up into darkness beyond our lights, covered with artwork that pulsed with bioluminescent beauty. The history of an entire species, painted in light. Robert sat in the center of the chamber, but he barely looked human anymore. His skin had gone pale as mushroom flesh. His eyes had grown larger, adapted for the eternal darkness. When he spoke, his voice echoed strangely, like it was coming from inside a deep well. "Dave," he said, and smiled with too many teeth. "It's wonderful down here, so quiet, so peaceful. No surface noise, no pollution, no crowds, just the deep places and all the time in the world. The white thing materialized beside him, not stepping out of rock this time, but forming itself from the air like condensing mist. In the glow of the wall paintings, I could see it clearly for the first time. It had been human once, or something close to human. But thousands of years of evolution in the caves had changed it. Elongated limbs for moving through narrow passages, pale skin that generated its own light, eyes adapted for absolute darkness, fingers that could manipulate matter at the molecular level. Homo spelaeus, it said into my mind. The cave people, your distant cousins. We lived in the deep places while your kind learned to make fire above. The chamber filled with images, not just in my head this time, but projected onto the walls like a movie. The story of two human species, one that climbed toward the light and one that descended into darkness, both intelligent, both creative, both capable of love and art and wonder. But only one had survived. Your people feared the dark places, called us devils, monsters, sealed our cities, poisoned our air, drove us deeper and deeper until only I remained. The images showed the genocide, caves collapsed by dynamite, underground rivers polluted with industrial waste, entire populations buried alive because surface humans feared what they didn't understand. For 300 years, I have been alone. Do you understand what that means? Centuries without conversation, without companionship, without touch. I will not endure another century of isolation. That's when I understood. The white thing wasn't trying to hurt us. It was trying to save us. In its own way, it was trying to turn us into companions who could survive in its world. Robert Chen wasn't being tortured. He was being adapted. You can't just change people, I said. We have lives up there, families, responsibilities. Your friend understands. It gestured toward Robert. He has seen the beauty of the deep places. Soon the others will understand as well. Jennifer and Michael stood beside Robert now, their transformations more advanced. Jennifer's skin glowed with soft light. Michael's eyes had grown to twice their normal size. They looked happy, peaceful, like they'd found something they hadn't known they were looking for. But Sarah and Tommy stood behind me, radiation sickness making them shake and sweat. The transformation process was killing them. Whatever adaptation the white thing was causing, not everyone would survive it. There has to be another way, I said. Some way we can help you without destroying my team. The white thing paused. I felt its surprise ripple through my mind. Help? You don't want to hurt anyone. You're just lonely. I understand loneliness. I told it about the steel mill accident, about watching my friends die, about coming to the mountains to escape the guilt and the nightmares, about 13 years of living alone in a ranger station, with only the trees and the radio for company. You know the deep solitude. Yes, but forcing companionship doesn't work. It just creates more loneliness. For the first time in our conversation, the white thing seemed uncertain. It had spent centuries planning this moment, dreaming of companions who could share its world, but it had never considered that friendship couldn't be forced. What do you suggest? I'll visit you regularly. You can show me your world, teach me about your people's history. In return, you let my team go. Let them return to the surface unchanged. And when you grow old and die, what then? We'll figure something out. Maybe we can find other people who want to learn about the deep places. Maybe we can establish some kind of ongoing contact between your world and ours. The white thing considered this. I felt its mind weighing centuries of loneliness against the possibility of genuine friendship. You would do this? Come to the darkness willingly, once a month, for as long as I'm able. Very well. The change began immediately. The molecular structure of Robert, Jennifer, and Michael started shifting back toward human normal. The radiation levels dropped. The sealed passages reopened, showing us the way back to the surface. But as we prepared to leave, the white thing touched my shoulder with one glowing finger. Remember your promise, David. McKinnon. The deep places will be waiting. The official report blamed the incident on equipment failure and natural cave hazards. Robert, Jennifer, and Michael recovered fully, though they all requested transfers to other universities. They didn't want to talk about what happened in the caves, and I didn't blame them. The scientific discoveries we'd made were classified under national security provisions. The government was very interested in molecular manipulation technology, even if they couldn't understand how it worked. Some secrets are too dangerous for the general public, but I kept my promise. Every month I hiked to a special entrance the white thing showed me, deep in the restricted section of Chestnut Ridge. I climbed down into the eternal darkness and spent 3 days in the cathedral chamber, learning about a civilization that thrived for thousands of years in spaces most people never dream of. The white thing, I call him Marcus now, after the Latin name for the ancient cave dwellers, has taught me things that revolutionized cave rescue techniques throughout the Appalachian region. How to read the subtle signs of unstable rock. How to navigate by magnetic field variations. How to find water sources in the deepest places. In return, I bring him news of the surface world, books and magazines, stories about human achievements and failures, pictures of places he'll never see but dreams about constantly. He's still lonely. I can feel it every time we touch minds. Centuries of isolation don't disappear because of one friendship. But it's better now. The desperate edge is gone, replaced by something that might eventually become contentment. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd refused his bargain, if I'd tried to fight him instead of understand him. The cave system extends for hundreds of miles underground. There are deep places that have never seen human footprints, chambers where the laws of physics work differently than on the surface. Marcus could have hidden us down there forever, slowly transforming us into pale companions who had no choice but to share his exile. Instead, he chose to trust a human promise. That says something important about both our species. The Park Service has increased protection around Chestnut Ridge. No more commercial development. No more unguided cave expeditions. Officially, it's for environmental protection. Unofficially, it's to make sure nobody disturbs the last survivor of humanity's first genocide. I'm 53 now. My knees creak when I climb down into the caves, and my hands shake more than they used to. In a few years, I'll be too old to make the monthly trips. We've talked about that, Marcus and I. He's working on a solution, something about extending human lifespan through careful molecular adjustment. Nothing dramatic like the forced transformations he attempted before. Just small changes that might give us a few more decades together. I'm considering it. After all, I've seen what the deep places have to offer. Beauty that exists nowhere else on Earth. Peace that the surface world has forgotten. And the friendship of someone who understands what true loneliness means. The white thing of Chestnut Ridge isn't a monster. He's just the last of his kind, trying to make sense of a world that forgot he existed. Some nights, when the moon is dark and the wind howls through the trees, I can hear him calling from the depths of the mountain, not hunting anymore, not seeking victims to transform, just saying hello. My name is Robert Ashford, but everyone calls me Bobby. I've been a park ranger for 12 years now, and I've seen some strange things in my time. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what happened at New River Gorge in the spring of 1988. I grew up climbing rocks. Started when I was just a kid, scrambling up the cliffs behind my house in Colorado. By the time I was 20, I was teaching other people how to climb safely. That's actually how I ended up becoming a ranger. I loved being outdoors, loved helping people, and I was good with ropes and rescue work. New River Gorge seemed like the perfect place for someone like me. The gorge is beautiful, no doubt about that. Huge sandstone cliffs rising up from the river, some of them over 1,000 feet tall. Rock climbers come from all over the country to test themselves on our routes. Most of the time, my job was pretty simple. I'd help lost hikers, check climbing permits, and occasionally rescue someone who got in over their head. April of 1988 started out like any other spring. The winter had been wet, which meant the rock faces were still damp and slippery. Any smart climber knows to wait for things to dry out before attempting the harder routes. But there's always someone who thinks the rules don't apply to them. That's what I figured was going on when I got the call that morning. "Bobby," said Sarah, our dispatcher, "we've got a climbing accident report at Diamond Point. Team of 4 from Virginia Tech. They're saying some pretty wild things." I grabbed my gear and headed out. Diamond Point is one of our more challenging multi-pitch routes. It's not the kind of place beginners should be messing around, especially in April when conditions are bad. I expected to find the usual story. Someone took a fall, maybe got banged up, probably embarrassed about making a rookie mistake. The parking area was almost empty when I arrived. Just one beat-up van with Virginia Tech stickers all over it. I could hear voices echoing off the cliff face before I even got out of my truck. Angry voices, scared voices. The climbing team was huddled together near the base of the cliff. 4 college kids, all of them experienced climbers from what I could tell by their gear, but they looked shaken up in a way I'd never seen before. The kind of shaken that comes from something way worse than a climbing accident. "You the ranger?" asked the team leader, a tall kid with sun-bleached hair and nervous eyes. "Thank God. We need to report an attack." "Attack?" I pulled out my notebook. "What kind of attack? Did someone throw rocks at you from above?" The 4 kids looked at each other. I could tell they were trying to decide how much to tell me. Finally, the leader spoke up. "Not someone," he said quietly. "Something. We were about 200 feet up the wall when they came out of nowhere. 6 of them, maybe more. Like monkeys, but huge, big as people, but walking on their hands and feet. And their faces." He shuddered. God, their faces looked like dogs. Or wolves. I kept writing, but inside I was rolling my eyes. Climbers sometimes see things when they're tired and stressed. The mind plays tricks on you when you're hanging off a cliff face. "These monkey things," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. "What did they do exactly?" "They attacked us," said one of the other kids, a girl with short red hair. "Came at us from 3 different directions at once, like they were working together. Smart. Too smart. We had to bail," added the leader. "Cut our ropes and rappelled down as fast as we could. Never been so scared in my life." I finished taking their statement and promised to file a report. As they packed up their gear, I walked over to the base of Diamond Point and looked up. The cliff face rose straight up into the morning sky, dark and imposing. Nothing moved up there except a few birds. But then I noticed something strange. Long scratches in the rock about 10 feet up, like someone had dragged their fingernails across the stone. except these scratches were deep, and they looked fresh. I'd been climbing for 20 years and had never seen anything like them. The scratches bothered me all day. That evening I drove back to Diamond Point with a headlamp and my climbing gear. I wanted to get a closer look at those marks. Setting up my ropes took about 15 minutes. The scratches were higher than I'd thought, closer to 20 feet up the wall. When I rappelled down to examine them, my blood went cold. They weren't made by fingernails. They were claw marks, 4 parallel gouges cut deep into solid sandstone, each one about 4 inches long. Whatever made them had to be incredibly strong and incredibly big. I spent another hour examining the rock face. The claw marks weren't random. They formed a pattern, like handholds, like something had climbed straight up the wall using its claws to grip the stone. The next morning, I called my supervisor and explained what I'd found. He listened without saying much, then told me to document everything and keep him posted. Probably just a black bear that got confused, he said. But I knew better. Bears don't climb vertical rock faces, and they don't have claws that can cut through sandstone. 3 days later, I got another call. This time it was about a solo climber named Mike Peterson. He was an experienced guy from Pennsylvania who came down to the gorge every spring. Mike was attempting a route called the Endless Wall when his rope got cut. Cut? I asked when I met him at the hospital. Mike had a broken arm and some nasty scrapes, but he was lucky to be alive. What do you mean, cut? I was rappelling down after finishing my climb, Mike explained. About 100 feet up the wall when I heard this sound above me, like chattering, but not normal chattering, angry chattering, if that makes sense. I nodded and kept writing. Then I heard my rope snap, not fray or break, snap, clean cut. I fell about 30 feet before my backup line caught me. When I got down and examined the rope, it had been bitten through, teeth marks clear as day. Mike showed me the rope. Sure enough, it had been severed by something with very large teeth. The bite pattern was unlike anything I'd ever seen. Too big for a dog, wrong shape for a bear. Mike, I said carefully, did you see what did this? He shook his head. Just shadows moving around on the cliff above me. Fast shadows, like they were jumping from ledge to ledge. I spent the rest of that day examining the Endless Wall route. At the base of the cliff, I found footprints in the mud. They were about the size of a large man's foot, but shaped wrong, too wide, with long toes that ended in what looked like claw marks. And they had thumbs, clear thumb impressions in the mud. Whatever was making these prints was heavy, smart, and very dangerous. That night, I did some research at the local library. I pulled out every book I could find about West Virginia wildlife, Cherokee history, and local folklore. Most of it was the usual stuff, stories about mountain lions and the occasional bear. But in one old book about Cherokee legends, I found something interesting. The Cherokee called them stone guardians. According to the stories, they were spirits that protected sacred places from people who didn't belong there. The book described them as looking like a cross between an ape and a wolf, with the ability to climb any rock face and the intelligence to work together in groups. I laughed when I first read it. I'd been climbing rocks all over the world and had never seen anything stranger than an aggressive baboon in Africa. The idea of unknown creatures in West Virginia seemed ridiculous. But then I remembered those claw marks in the stone. 2 weeks later, everything changed. I was doing my morning patrol when I heard screaming from the direction of Bridge Buttress. Real screaming, the kind that freezes your blood. I grabbed my radio and ran toward the sound. What I found there changed everything I thought I knew about the world. A climbing guide named Tom Hendricks was leading a group of beginners up an easy route. Tom had been guiding in the gorge for 8 years and knew every inch of those cliffs. He was the last person who should have gotten into trouble. But when I arrived, Tom was hanging upside down from his rope about 60 feet up the wall, not moving. Below him on the ground, his 3 clients were huddled together, crying and pointing at the cliff. "It grabbed him," one of them kept saying. "It just reached down and grabbed him." I set up my gear and rappelled up to Tom as fast as I could. He was dead. His neck was broken, and his body was covered in bite marks. But what really scared me was where I found him. Tom was hanging from a ledge that shouldn't exist. I'd climbed that route dozens of times, and there had never been a ledge there before. Someone, or something, had carved a new shelf in the rock face, and they'd arranged Tom's body on it like he was sleeping. Around the makeshift grave, stones had been carefully arranged in patterns that looked almost like Cherokee symbols. As I was examining the scene, I heard something above me, a soft chattering sound like monkeys talking to each other. But there was something wrong with it, something that made the hair on my neck stand up. I looked up and saw them for the first time. 3 creatures crouched on a ledge about 40 feet above me. They were big, maybe 6 feet tall, with powerful arms and legs covered in dark fur. But their faces were the worst part. They looked like a cross between a chimpanzee and a German shepherd. Intelligent eyes, but wild and angry. And when they saw me looking, they bared their teeth. Those teeth were huge. Long, sharp canines that could easily bite through a climbing rope, or a human neck. One of them made a sound that was part howl, part shriek. The other 2 answered, and suddenly the whole cliff face was alive with movement. I counted at least 8 of them, jumping from ledge to ledge with impossible grace. They moved like they weighed nothing, like gravity didn't apply to them. And they were all looking at me. That night, I called an emergency meeting with my supervisor and the park superintendent. I laid out everything I'd found, the claw marks, the bite patterns, the footprints, and Tom Hendricks' death. I even had photos of the creatures I'd taken from the cliff face. "Bobby," said the superintendent after looking at my evidence, "this is serious, but we can't close the park based on stories about monkey monsters. We need to handle this carefully." "Handle what carefully?" I asked. "People are dying." "We'll increase ranger patrols," he said. "Issue warnings about dangerous wildlife. But we can't panic the public with talk about unknown creatures." I wanted to argue, but I understood the politics. New River Gorge brought millions of dollars into the local economy every year. Closing the park would hurt a lot of people. But I also knew those creatures were still out there, and they were getting bolder. Over the next 2 weeks, the incidents multiplied. Climbers reported equipment being stolen from the base of cliffs overnight. Ropes were found cut in impossible places, and 3 more climbers were attacked, though they managed to escape with only minor injuries. All the attacks happened on the same 5 or 6 routes. All of them were cliff faces that, according to my research, had been sacred to the Cherokee tribe. The creatures weren't attacking randomly. They were defending specific places. I started camping near the affected areas, hoping to learn more about the creatures' behavior. What I discovered was both fascinating and terrifying. They were incredibly intelligent. I watched them work together to solve complex problems, like how to cut a rope that was attached to an anchor 70 feet up a cliff face. One creature would climb up and bite through the rope while 2 others positioned themselves to catch anything that fell. They planned their actions in advance. They also seemed to communicate in a sophisticated way. I recorded hours of their vocalizations and had them analyzed by a professor at West Virginia University who studied animal behavior. She told me the sound patterns were more complex than any known primate language. Whatever these creatures were, they were smart enough to have their own form of speech. But the most disturbing thing was how they seemed to appear and disappear without warning. I'd be watching an empty cliff face through binoculars, and suddenly they'd be there. And just as suddenly, they'd vanish again. Sometimes I swore they were moving through the solid rock itself. The breakthrough came when I met with Robert Two Bears, a Cherokee elder who lived about an hour south of the park. I'd contacted him hoping to learn more about the old stories regarding stone guardians. "You've seen them," he said when I finished describing the creatures. It wasn't a question. "Yes," I admitted, "but I don't understand what they are." Robert nodded slowly. "My grandfather told me about the stone guardians when I was young. He said they weren't animals at all. They're spirits. The spirits of warriors who died defending sacred places. They take physical form when those places are threatened." Threatened by what? By people who don't understand what they're dealing with. The cliff faces your climbers use. They're not just rocks. They're sacred spaces where our ancestors went to speak with the spirits, to have visions, to become adults. When people treat them like playgrounds, the guardians wake up. I thought about all the climbing routes where attacks had occurred. Is there a way to make them stop? Without more people getting hurt? Robert was quiet for a long time. "Maybe," he said finally, "but it would require understanding and respect, things most people aren't willing to give." 3 days later, the situation exploded. A military unit was conducting mountain warfare training in the park. Special Forces soldiers who were supposed to be learning advanced climbing techniques. I'd warned their commanding officer about the dangerous wildlife in certain areas, but he'd laughed it off. "Rangers," he'd said, "my boys can handle a few angry monkeys." I found the first body at dawn. Sergeant Williams, a 20-year veteran with multiple tours in hostile environments. He was discovered inside a cave formation 300 feet up a sheer cliff face. There was no climbing equipment anywhere near him. No ropes, no anchors, no way he could have gotten there by himself. The cave itself shouldn't have existed. I'd climbed past that spot dozens of times, and there had never been an opening in the rock before. It was like the cliff face had opened up just long enough to trap the sergeant inside, then closed again. By noon, we'd found 2 more soldiers, both dead, both positioned in impossible places high on the cliff faces. And around each body, stones had been arranged in complex patterns that looked increasingly like Cherokee symbols. The creatures were sending a message, but I was the only one who understood what it meant. That afternoon, the park superintendent made the decision I'd been dreading. He called in a wildlife control team with tranquilizer guns and orders to capture or kill whatever was responsible for the deaths. I tried to stop them. I explained about the sacred sites and the Cherokee legends, but nobody wanted to hear about spiritual guardians when soldiers were dying. The wildlife team set up their equipment at the base of Diamond Point just before sunset. They had motion sensors, night vision cameras, and enough firepower to take down a grizzly bear. I watched from a distance, my stomach sick with worry. The creatures came at midnight. They moved like shadows, flowing down the cliff face without sound. The motion sensors never triggered. The cameras caught nothing but brief blurs of darkness. And when the shooting started, the tranquilizer darts passed right through them like they weren't entirely solid. 3 members of the wildlife team were killed in less than 5 minutes. The rest fled, leaving their equipment scattered across the ground. I found their team leader the next morning. He was alive, but barely conscious. When he saw me, he grabbed my arm with shaking hands. "They're not animals," he whispered. "They're ghosts, ghosts that can kill." I knew then that conventional solutions weren't going to work. If I wanted to stop the killing, I was going to have to try Robert Two Bear's approach. I was going to have to talk to the creatures directly. The problem was, I had no idea if they'd let me live long enough to try. I spent 3 days preparing for what I knew might be my last climb. Robert Two Bears had explained the Cherokee Vision Quest tradition to me, how young warriors would climb to sacred ledges and fast until the spirits spoke to them. If I wanted to communicate with the guardians, I had to approach them the right way. The night of April 30th, I hiked alone to the base of Diamond Point. I carried no modern climbing equipment, just a simple rope made from natural fibers that Robert had given me. No metal hardware, no synthetic gear. According to Cherokee tradition, metal objects could interfere with spiritual communication. The creatures knew I was coming. I could feel them watching me as I began to climb. But for the first time, they didn't attack. They let me ascend the cliff face in silence, following the ancient route that Robert had described to me. Climbing without modern gear was terrifying. Every handhold had to be perfect. Every foot placement was a matter of life and death. But as I climbed higher, something strange began to happen. The rock face seemed to help me. Handholds appeared where none had been before. Footholds materialized just when I needed them most. 200 feet up the wall, I reached the sacred ledge. It was larger than I'd expected, a natural shelf about 20 feet wide and 10 feet deep. Ancient symbols had been carved into the back wall, weathered by centuries but still visible in the moonlight. I wasn't alone on the ledge. The alpha male sat in the center of the space, waiting for me. He was bigger than the others, maybe 7 feet tall and built like a professional wrestler. His face was the perfect blend of ape and wolf, with intelligent yellow eyes that seemed to look right through me. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. Then he spoke. Not with words, but directly into my mind. Images and emotions flooded my consciousness. I saw the cliff faces as they had been centuries ago, sacred places where Cherokee youth came to speak with their ancestors. I felt the pain of watching these holy sites treated as entertainment. I understood, finally, what the guardians were really protecting. You climb the sacred path. The Alpha's voice echoed in my thoughts. But you bring the poison of your people's disrespect. I bring respect, I said aloud, hoping he could understand me. I want to learn. More images flashed through my mind. The creatures weren't just spirits. They were the collective memory of every Cherokee warrior who had ever died defending their homeland. They existed partially in our world and partially in the spirit realm, able to take physical form when the sacred sites were threatened. Your kind destroys what you do not understand. The Alpha continued. You turn vision quest routes into games. You anchor metal into holy stone. You leave trash where your ancestors left prayers. We didn't know, I said. We can change. We can do better. The Alpha stood up and I realized how enormous he really was. His claws gleamed in the moonlight, not just weapons, but tools for carving stone, for creating the handholds that allowed spiritual passage up the cliff face. Prove it, he said. Suddenly the ledge beneath me began to crumble. I scrambled backward as chunks of rock fell away into the darkness below. Within seconds I was trapped on a tiny outcropping barely big enough for my feet. The Alpha watched calmly as I pressed my back against the cliff face, trying not to fall. Climb, his voice commanded. Show us you understand the sacred path. I looked up. The route above me was impossible, a completely smooth wall with no visible handholds. But as I placed my hands on the stone, I felt something incredible happen. My fingers found tiny cracks that hadn't been there before. My feet discovered microscopic ledges that could, somehow, support my weight. It wasn't me doing the climbing. The cliff face itself was helping me, guiding me up the ancient spiritual route. I was experiencing what Cherokee youth had felt for generations, the sensation of being supported by the stone spirits themselves. When I reached the top of the cliff, the entire pack was waiting for me. 8 or 9 of the creatures, all sitting in a circle around a flat area where someone had built a small fire. They gestured for me to sit with them. What happened next changed everything I thought I knew about reality. The Alpha placed one massive hand on my forehead, and suddenly I could see everything. Past, present, and future spread out before me like a map. I saw the first Cherokee climbers ascending these cliffs 1,000 years ago. I saw the arrival of white settlers and the gradual destruction of the sacred sites. I saw the recent climbers treating holy ground like a sports arena. But I also saw something else. A possible future where both worlds could coexist. You can be the bridge, the Alpha told me, but only if your people learn respect, only if they understand what they are truly climbing. What do you want me to do? I asked. The images that flowed into my mind were clear. Certain cliff faces would remain permanently off limits, the most sacred routes where the Cherokee had conducted their most important ceremonies. Other areas could be open to climbing, but only after proper education about their cultural significance. Climbers would need to understand that they were guests in a holy place. "We will give you power," the Alpha said. "Power to protect both our people and yours. But you must use it wisely." He pressed both hands against my chest, and I felt electricity shoot through my entire body. My muscles felt stronger. My vision became sharper. My connection to the rock face was now permanent. I would always be able to climb with the assistance of the stone spirits. But with the power came responsibility. I was now the human guardian of the sacred sites, entrusted with maintaining the balance between spiritual protection and practical access. As dawn broke over the gorge, the creatures began to fade, not disappearing, but returning to their spiritual realm. The Alpha was the last to go. "Remember," he told me, "we are always watching, always protecting. Respect the sacred places, and we will respect your people." When I rappelled down from the cliff that morning, I was no longer the same person who had climbed up the night before. I had become something new, part ranger, part spiritual guardian, part bridge between two worlds. That was 37 years ago, and I'm still serving as the guardian of New River Gorge. The official title on my business card says Cultural Liaison and Climbing Safety Coordinator. But that doesn't really capture what I do. The compromise we worked out has held. Certain cliff faces remain permanently closed to climbing, marked with signs explaining their cultural significance to the Cherokee people. Other routes are open, but climbers must complete a cultural education course before receiving permits. We teach them about the history of the area, the proper way to approach sacred spaces, and the importance of leaving no trace. The deaths stopped after that night in 1988. The creatures still watch the cliffs, but they no longer attack respectful visitors. Sometimes experienced climbers report feeling like the rock face is helping them, providing unexpected handholds or warning them away from dangerous routes. They don't usually mention it in their trip reports, but word gets around in the climbing community. I still have the abilities the Alpha gave me. My rescue record is legendary throughout Appalachian climbing areas. I can climb routes that should be impossible for someone my age, and I always seem to know exactly where to find climbers in trouble. Park Service headquarters assumes I'm just exceptionally experienced, and I've never corrected them. Every few months, I meet with Robert Two Bears to discuss how things are going. He's gotten old, we both have, but his wisdom remains sharp. He tells me the Cherokee community appreciates what we've accomplished here. Young Native Americans sometimes come to climb the permitted routes, reconnecting with ancestral traditions while learning modern safety techniques. The arrangement isn't perfect. Some climbing organizations still complain about the restricted access. A few climbers ignore the permits and try to climb the sacred routes anyway. When that happens, they usually find their equipment mysteriously damaged or their routes blocked by sudden rockfall. The Guardians are still protective, but they're more patient now. They give people chances to learn and change. I've trained 3 other rangers in the cultural protocols, and I'm working on establishing a formal partnership with the Cherokee Nation to ensure this knowledge continues after I retire. The spirits seem to approve. They've appeared to my trainees during their training climbs, marking them with the same protective abilities I carry. New River Gorge has become a model for other parks dealing with conflicts between recreational access and indigenous sacred sites. Park services from around the country send representatives to study our compromise system. We've proven that ancient traditions and modern recreation can coexist when people are willing to listen and learn. But late at night, when I'm walking the trails alone, I still sometimes hear that familiar chattering echoing off the cliff faces. The Guardians are still there, still watching, still protecting. They're just waiting to see what kind of people tomorrow's climbers will choose to be. The Cherokee have a saying: we do not inherit the land from our ancestors. We borrow it from our children. The devil monkeys of New River Gorge taught me that lesson in a way I'll never forget. Some places are too sacred to treat like playgrounds. Some spirits are too important to ignore. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you can find a way to honor both. My name is Marcus Donovan, but everyone calls me Mac. I've been a ranger at the Point Pleasant Wildlife Management Area for 19 years now, since I came back from Korea in 1948. I'm 42 years old, and I thought I'd seen everything this world could throw at a man. I was wrong. It was November 1966, and the weather was turning mean. The temperature had dropped to 20 degrees, and thick fog rolled off the Ohio River every night, making the hollows look like something from a ghost story. I'd been patrolling the TNT area. That's what we called the 2,500 acres of abandoned World War II munitions storage deep in the Appalachian forest. Most folks stayed away from there, which suited me fine. It was quiet work, and after what I'd seen in Korea, quiet was good. My wife Sarah had died 3 years back in a mine accident, so the job was pretty much all I had left. I knew every inch of those woods, every trail and bunker. The old Cherokee used to call this place Cornstalk's Curse, named after their chief who got executed here way back. Local folks had stories about a harbinger bird that showed up before bad things happened, but I never believed in that mountain superstition. I figured it was just talk from people who didn't understand how wildlife really worked. The bunkers were left over from the war, big concrete things scattered through the trees where they used to store explosives and chemicals. Most were sealed up now, but some had broken open over the years. I made sure kids stayed out of them and checked for vagrants or illegal hunters. Simple work for a simple man. That Tuesday night in November, everything changed. I was sitting in my truck at the ranger station filling out paperwork by lamplight when the phone rang. It was Bill Morrison from the state police. "Mac, I got 3 separate calls tonight about some kind of giant bird scaring couples up at the Lovers' Lanes," he said. "All 3 say the same thing. Something with a 10-foot wingspan and red eyes like headlights. You seen anything like that? I laughed. Bill, biggest bird we got around here is maybe a great horned owl. They can look pretty scary in headlights, especially if folks are already spooked. Maybe so, but one of the couples swears this thing followed their car for 2 miles, keeping pace at 60 miles an hour. That sound like owl behavior to you? It didn't, but I wasn't about to start believing in monster birds. I'll take a look around tomorrow, see if maybe we got an injured bird acting strange. Could be rabies making it aggressive. Appreciate it, Mac. Just be careful out there, all right? I hung up thinking Bill was getting soft in his old age. 23 years as a cop, and he was worried about a bird story from some teenagers. But something about those calls nagged at me. 3 separate reports all describing the same thing. In my experience, when people started agreeing on details like that, there was usually something real behind it, even if they didn't understand what they were seeing. The next morning, I loaded my truck with the usual gear: flashlight, radio, first aid kit, and my service pistol. I'd also brought my camera, thinking maybe I could get a picture of whatever bird was causing the fuss. Probably just a great horned owl that had lost its fear of humans. I drove out to the TNT area as the sun was coming up, fog still thick in the valleys. The road was muddy from the recent rain, and I had to use 4-wheel drive to get through some of the deeper ruts. As I got deeper into the forest, I noticed something odd. It was too quiet. Now, I'd been walking these woods for nearly 20 years, and I knew every sound they made. There should have been squirrels chattering, birds calling, the rustle of small animals moving through the underbrush. Instead, there was nothing but the sound of my engine and the fog dripping off the trees. I parked near the main access road and started walking the perimeter where the couples had reported seeing the creature. The ground was soft enough to show tracks, and I found plenty: deer, raccoon, a few boot prints from hikers who'd ignored the no trespassing signs. Then I found something else. About 50 yards from the road, pressed deep into the mud, were footprints unlike anything I'd ever seen. They were roughly the shape of bird tracks, but massive, 6 inches across and almost as long. The strangest part was they looked almost human in some ways, like they had thumbs. And the claw marks. I'd never seen claws that big outside of a museum. Whatever made these tracks was walking on 2 feet, not landing like a bird. The spacing between the prints suggested something tall, maybe 7 feet or more, and heavy. Each print was pressed nearly 2 inches into the soft ground. I knelt down and took pictures, measuring the tracks with my pocket ruler. As I was working, a chill ran down my neck that had nothing to do with the cold air. Something was watching me. I stood up slowly and looked around the clearing, hand moving instinctively to my pistol. The fog was thick enough that I could only see about 30 feet in any direction, but I had the strongest feeling that something was out there, studying me. "Hello?" I called out. "Anyone there?" My voice seemed to die in the mist, swallowed up like the forest itself was eating the sound. I waited a full minute, listening hard, but heard nothing except the drip of condensation and my own heartbeat. I finished photographing the tracks and headed back to my truck, that watched feeling following me the whole way. When I tried to radio in my report, all I got was static mixed with a strange clicking sound, almost like something tapping against the microphone. I fiddled with the radio for 10 minutes before giving up. That afternoon, I drove to town to get the film developed and talk to the witnesses. The first couple I found was Roger and Linda Scarberry. newlyweds who lived in a trailer park outside Point Pleasant. They were both shaken up, but willing to talk. "It was huge, Mr. Donovan," Linda said, her hands trembling as she poured coffee. "Bigger than any bird has a right to be. And those eyes, they weren't like animal eyes. They were smart, like it was thinking about us." Roger nodded. "When we first saw it, we thought maybe it was a crane or something standing in the road. But then it spread its wings, and they must have been 10 feet across. Easy, maybe more. When we drove toward it, the thing just took off. But instead of flying away, it followed us." "Followed you how?" I asked. "Kept pace with the car," Roger said. "We were doing 65, 70 miles an hour on Route 62, and this thing was right beside us, flapping those massive wings but not even looking tired. Every time I looked in the side mirror, there it was, staring at us with those red eyes." "How long did this go on?" "Maybe 2 miles, Linda whispered. "Then it just vanished. 1 second it was there, the next it was gone. But we could still feel it watching us all the way home." I asked them to describe the creature in detail, and their account was remarkably consistent. 7 feet tall when standing, covered in dark feathers or fur, muscular like a man but with wings and a bird-like face, and those glowing red eyes that seemed to see right through you. I thanked them and drove to the photo shop to pick up my film. The pictures of the tracks came out clear and sharp, showing every detail of those impossible footprints. I also had them make copies to send to a wildlife expert I knew at the university. That night, I decided to patrol the TNT area after dark, when the creature was supposedly most active. I brought extra batteries for my flashlight and made sure my radio was working. As I drove deeper into the forest, the same unnatural silence settled over everything. I parked near Bunker 7, one of the larger storage facilities that was still partially intact. Something about that particular bunker had always bothered me, though I couldn't say why. It seemed to attract more than its share of vandalism and trespassers, despite being no different from the others. I was walking around the bunker's perimeter when my flashlight beam caught something that made my blood run cold. The metal door of the bunker, which was supposed to be sealed shut, was hanging open. But that wasn't the worst part. The heavy steel door had been torn off its hinges from the outside. The metal was twisted and shredded like it was made of tin foil, and I could see claw marks gouged deep into the concrete walls around the entrance. I drew my pistol and approached carefully. "Hello? Anyone in there?" No answer, but I could hear a sound coming from inside the bunker. A low, rhythmic noise like breathing, but too deep and slow to be human. I clicked on my radio to call for backup, but all I got was that strange clicking interference again, now mixed with what sounded like massive wings flapping. I was about to investigate the bunker when I heard a car approaching fast on the access road. A moment later, Bill Morrison's patrol car came sliding to a stop in a spray of gravel and mud. He jumped out, looking pale and shaken. "Mac, thank God you're here. We found Tommy Fletcher about half a mile down the road. He's dead." Tommy Fletcher was a local teenager, 17 years old, and known for sneaking into the TNT area to drink beer with his friends. Bill led me to where they'd found him, and what I saw there made my stomach turn. Tommy was lying at the base of a 100-foot cliff, his body broken like he'd been dropped from a great height. But there was no cliff above where we found him, just empty air. The medical examiner later said his injuries were consistent with falling from at least 200 feet, but there was nowhere around there that high. Worse yet, Tommy's car was found a quarter-mile away, completely undamaged and still running with the driver's door standing wide open. Whatever had taken him had snatched him right out of his car and carried him off. "The strange thing is," Bill said as we stood over Tommy's body, "there are no footprints around him except ours. It's like he just fell out of the sky." As Bill was talking, I became aware of a shadow passing overhead, blocking out the stars for a moment. Both of us looked up at the same time, but saw nothing except empty darkness. "Did you see that?" Bill asked. "See what?" "Something just flew over us. Something big." I was about to answer when a sound echoed through the forest that made every hair on my body stand up. A shriek that was part bird call and part human scream, coming from somewhere high above the trees. It was the loneliest, most terrifying sound I'd ever heard. Bill and I stood there in the dark, hands on our weapons, listening to that awful cry fade away into the distance. When it was gone, the silence that followed felt deeper than before, like the whole forest was holding its breath. "Mac," Bill said quietly, "what the hell is out there?" I wished I had an answer for him. Over the next week, everything went to pieces. 3 more people went missing from the TNT area, and every night brought new reports of the creature. The local newspapers started calling it the Mothman, and that name stuck like glue. Jake Morrison, my hunting partner and the closest thing I had to a friend, volunteered to help with the search patrols. Jake was a good man, steady and reliable, with 2 kids and a wife who made the best apple pie in 3 counties. If anyone could help me figure out what was happening, it was him. We were checking the northern section of the TNT area on a Thursday night when Jake's truck was found empty on a back road, the driver's door torn clean off its hinges. Just like with Tommy Fletcher, there were no footprints, no signs of a struggle, nothing to explain where Jake had gone. We searched for 3 days with dogs and volunteers from all over the county. The search dogs would track Jake's scent to a certain point near Bunker Nerve 7, then refuse to go any further. They'd whine and pull backward on their leashes, hair standing up along their backs like they were terrified of something. On the 3rd day, we found him. Jake was inside Bunker number 7, curled up in a corner like a child, alive but not really there. His eyes were open, but he didn't recognize any of us. He just sat there, rocking back and forth, whispering the same words over and over. The eyes, the red eyes. The doctors at the hospital couldn't find anything physically wrong with him, but Jake's mind was completely gone. Whatever he'd seen in that bunker had broken something inside him that couldn't be fixed. His wife had to put him in a special home where they take care of people who can't take care of themselves anymore. That's when I knew for certain that this wasn't just some aggressive wildlife. This was something else entirely, something that could reach into a man's mind and tear it apart. Sergeant Bill Davis from the state police came down to help with the investigation. He was a practical man, ex-military like me, and he brought professional equipment, infrared cameras, sound recording devices, things I'd never seen before. If anyone could approach this scientifically, it was Davis. "I've seen a lot of strange things in 20 years of police work," he told me as we set up surveillance near Bunker number 7. "But this one's got me stumped. Whatever's happening here, it's not following any normal patterns." We'd been monitoring the bunker for 2 nights when all our equipment started malfunctioning at once. Cameras went dead, radios filled with static. Even our truck engines started sputtering like they were running out of gas. The infrared equipment showed a massive heat signature moving around the bunker, but when we looked with our eyes, there was nothing there. That's when we heard it. The same terrible shriek I'd heard the night Tommy Fletcher died, but much closer this time. It seemed to come from right above our heads, and when I looked up I saw something that made my blood freeze. A shape was blocking out the stars, huge and dark, with wings spread wide against the night sky. As I watched, two red lights appeared where its eyes should be, glowing like hot coals in the darkness. "Jesus Christ," Davis whispered. "What is that thing?" The creature circled overhead for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, and during that time, I felt something pressing against the inside of my skull like invisible fingers trying to get in. Images flashed through my mind, pictures of disasters and death, bridges falling, buildings collapsing, people screaming. It was like watching a movie of terrible things that hadn't happened yet. Then suddenly, the creature was gone, and the night was quiet again. Our equipment came back online like nothing had happened, but both Davis and I were shaking like leaves. "Did you see those images?" Davis asked. "Those visions?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. We'd both seen the same thing, a vision of the Silver Bridge spanning the Ohio River, packed with rush-hour traffic, suddenly collapsing and sending dozens of cars into the icy water below. "That's impossible," Davis said. "The Silver Bridge has been there for 40 years. It's solid as a rock." But even as he said it, I could see the doubt in his eyes. We'd both felt the truth of that vision, the terrible certainty that what we'd seen was going to happen. Dr. Robert Smith arrived from West Virginia University the next day. He was an ornithologist, a bird expert, and he brought even more sophisticated equipment than Davis had. Dr. Smith was a small, nervous man who wore thick glasses and talked in big words, but he knew his business. "I've studied every species of bird in North America," he told us as he set up his sound recording equipment. "Whatever you're dealing with here, it's not in any textbook." Dr. Smith's equipment was designed to detect sounds that human ears couldn't hear, frequencies below and above our normal range. Almost immediately, his machine started picking up something strange coming from bunker number 7, a deep, subsonic pulse that registered on his instruments but that we couldn't hear. "This is fascinating," Dr. Smith said, studying his readouts. "This frequency is known to cause fear responses in mammals. It's how large predators sometimes paralyze their prey. But I've never seen anything this powerful." As he spoke, his face went pale, and he pointed at one of his gauges. "The signal's getting stronger. Whatever's making this sound, it's getting closer." That's when the bunker door, which had been sealed shut since we'd found Jake, slowly began to creak open. Dr. Smith grabbed his equipment and started backing toward our trucks, but his foot caught on a root and he went down hard. His infrared camera scattered across the ground, and as he reached for it, something came out of the bunker. It moved too fast for me to get a clear look, just a dark shape flowing like water across the ground. Dr. Smith screamed once, a high, terrified sound, and then he was gone, pulled into the darkness of the bunker so quickly it was like he'd never been there at all. Davis and I ran to the bunker entrance, flashlights in hand, but we couldn't see anything inside except blackness that seemed deeper than it should be. We called Dr. Smith's name, but our voices echoed strangely, like we were shouting into a cave that went on forever. We found his body the next morning in the tunnel system beneath the bunker, positioned like he was sleeping peacefully with his arms spread wide. The coroner said his heart had stopped from extreme fear, but there wasn't a mark on him. That night, as I sat in my cabin trying to make sense of everything that had happened, I realized the truth. This wasn't just some animal protecting its territory. This was something ancient and intelligent, something that fed on human fear and death. And for reasons I didn't understand, it had chosen Point Pleasant as its hunting ground. The worst part was those visions it had shown me. I couldn't get the image of that bridge collapse out of my head. December 15th, 1967. That was the date I'd seen in my mind, clear as day. 46 people would die when the Silver Bridge fell into the Ohio River. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, but deep down, I knew it was real. The creature hadn't just shown me a possible future. It had shown me something that was definitely going to happen, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. By December 1967, I was barely sleeping. The visions came every night now, always the same. The Silver Bridge collapsing on December 15th at exactly 5:04 in the evening, during rush hour when the bridge would be packed with people heading home from work. I could see it all in perfect detail. The sudden groan of metal, the way the bridge deck would buckle and twist, the cars sliding helplessly into the dark water below. I'd tried to warn people, called the state highway department, wrote letters to the newspapers, even went to see the mayor. But who was going to believe a story about a giant bird monster showing psychic visions to a burned-out park ranger? They all listened politely and then did nothing. On December 14th, the night before the vision was supposed to come true, I drove out to bunker number 7 one last time. I had to know why this thing had chosen me, why it was showing me these terrible previews of disaster. The bunker door stood wide open, just like it had the night Dr. Smith died. I walked inside with my flashlight, following the concrete corridor deeper underground than I'd ever gone before. The tunnel seemed to stretch on forever, leading down into natural caves that shouldn't have existed under that part of the forest. The walls were covered with drawings, old ones, maybe hundreds of years old, showing a winged figure surrounded by scenes of death and destruction. I realized that the Cherokee stories about the harbinger bird hadn't been superstition after all. This thing had been here long before white settlers ever arrived, feeding on human suffering and predicting disasters. At the end of the tunnel, I found a vast underground chamber with a pool of black water in the center. And standing beside that pool, waiting for me, was the creature. It was even more terrifying up close than I'd imagined. 7 feet tall and powerfully built, with muscles like a man but covered in dark feathers that seemed to absorb light. Its face was vaguely human, but stretched and distorted, with a sharp beak where its mouth should be. And those eyes. They glowed like red neon signs, boring into me with an intelligence that was ancient and hungry. When it spoke, I heard its voice inside my head rather than through my ears. "You have been chosen," it said without moving its beak. "You will be my herald." Herald of what? I managed to ask, even though my voice came out as barely a whisper. Of necessary death, of change, of the fear that feeds me. The creature stepped closer, and I could feel its presence pressing against my mind like a huge weight. More images flooded my consciousness, not just the bridge collapse, but other disasters stretching into the future. Mine explosions, building fires, plane crashes, all the ways that people would die in the years to come. "I do not cause these events," the voice continued. "I merely announce them. I feed on the psychic energy released when many die at once. It is my nature." "Why me?" I asked. "Why show me these things if I can't stop them?" "Because someone must witness. Someone must carry the warning, even when the warning goes unheeded. That is the role of the herald." The creature spread its massive wings, and I felt a wind that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. In that wind, I heard the voices of everyone who would die tomorrow on the bridge. 46 people going about their normal lives, not knowing they had less than 24 hours left. "Choose," the creature said. "Accept your role willingly and gain the power to save some lives, or resist and watch helplessly as all 46 perish without warning." I thought about all the people who would be on that bridge tomorrow evening, working people heading home to their families, maybe stopping to pick up groceries or Christmas presents. People like my wife Sarah had been, just trying to live their lives in peace. "What do you want me to do?" I asked. The creature's red eyes flared brighter, and suddenly I was seeing through its perspective, looking down at Point Pleasant from high above, seeing the patterns of life and death that normal humans couldn't perceive. I could sense which buildings would burn, which roads would see fatal accidents, which people carried the seeds of their own destruction. Become my voice in the human world. Accept the burden of foresight. Help when you can, warn when you must, but understand that death comes for all in its proper time. As it spoke, I felt something fundamental change inside my head. The creature was forming a permanent connection between us, a psychic link that would let it feed me information about future disasters. I could sense that this gift would come with a terrible cost: madness, isolation, the constant weight of knowing about tragedies before they happened. But I thought about those 46 people who would die tomorrow, and I made my choice. "I accept," I said. The creature touched my forehead with one massive claw, and pain like lightning shot through my skull. For a moment, I could see everything, past, present, and future all at once. The entire timeline of human suffering stretched out like a map. Then the vision faded, leaving me on my knees beside the dark pool, alone. The creature was gone, but I could still feel its presence in the back of my mind, a cold weight that would never leave me. And I knew exactly what I had to do tomorrow evening at 5:04. I had less than 18 hours to try to save some lives before the Silver Bridge fell. I spent all of December 15th trying to minimize the disaster I knew was coming. I called in bomb threats to the county courthouse and the newspaper office, hoping to create enough confusion that they'd close the bridge. I reported a gas leak near the bridge approaches. I even tried to get the fire department to block traffic with a fake emergency. Nothing worked. The bridge stayed open. At 4:30 that afternoon, I drove to the Point Pleasant side of the Silver Bridge and parked where I could watch the evening rush hour traffic. Cars and trucks were already streaming across in both directions, just like in my vision. I tried one last time to convince a state trooper to close the bridge, claiming I'd seen structural damage, but he just told me to mind my own business. At exactly 5:04 p.m., I felt the creature's presence surge in my mind, and I knew it was feeding on what was about to happen. The Silver Bridge let out a long, groaning sound that seemed to come from deep inside the metal itself. Then, just like in my vision, the suspension cables snapped with sounds like gunshots. The bridge deck twisted and buckled, and I watched helplessly as 46 cars and trucks plunged into the icy Ohio River. The sound of metal screaming and people crying out would stay with me for the rest of my life. I was one of the first responders on the scene, and I managed to pull 3 people out of the water before hypothermia could kill them. 3 lives out of 46. Not much, but it was something. In the weeks that followed, I learned the names of everyone who died that day, and I still remember them all. The official investigation blamed the collapse on a faulty steel eye-bar in the suspension system, but I knew the real truth. The creature had fed on all that death and suffering, growing stronger from the psychic energy released when so many lives ended at once. After the bridge collapse, I retired from the ranger service. Couldn't handle being around people anymore, knowing the things I now knew about when and how they might die. I built a small cabin deep in the woods and became what folks call a hermit. But the visions never stopped. Every few months I'd get a flash of some coming disaster, a mine explosion here, a building fire there, always with enough detail that I could try to warn someone. Most of the time, people didn't listen. Sometimes they did, and a few lives got saved. The creature moved on from Point Pleasant after the bridge collapse, but others have taken its place over the years. There's always been something unnatural in these mountains, something that feeds on human fear and death. The Cherokee knew it, and now I know it too. Sometimes late at night, I still feel those red eyes watching me from the darkness. The creature keeps its promises. I can sense disasters before they happen, but the knowledge is slowly driving me insane. That's the price of being a herald for something that doesn't understand human concepts like mercy or kindness. The Mothman sightings continue throughout Appalachia, always appearing before major tragedies. Other people have seen it. Miners before cave-ins, residents before chemical plant explosions, travelers before deadly storms. It's still out there, still feeding, still choosing heralds to carry its warnings. And sometimes when the visions get particularly bad, I think about that choice the creature gave me in the underground chamber. I could have said no, could have let all 46 people die without any warning at all. But then I remember those 3 lives I managed to save, and I know I made the right decision. Even if it cost me my sanity, even if it means I'll spend the rest of my life knowing exactly how the world is going to end, one disaster at a time. My name is Marcus Donovan, and I've seen the future. Trust me when I tell you, you don't want to know what's coming. My name is Jonathan Whitehorse, but everyone just calls me John. I've been a park ranger at Great Smoky Mountains National Park for 14 years now, ever since I got out of the Marines in 1963. My mom was Cherokee, and these mountains have always been home to me. After everything I saw in Vietnam, I thought protecting this beautiful land would be peaceful work. I was wrong about that. It was September of 1977, and the tourist season was winding down. The leaves were just starting to turn, painting the mountains in reds and golds. Morning fog rolled through the valleys like ghostly fingers, and the air had that crisp bite that meant winter was coming. This was my favorite time of year. Fewer crowds, better wildlife watching, and the mountains felt more like the sacred place my grandmother always said they were. I specialized in wilderness survival training and cultural education. Park visitors loved hearing the old Cherokee stories, especially the kids. I'd tell them about rabbit and bear, about the thunder beings, about how Cherokee people lived in harmony with these mountains for thousands of years. The stories were part of my heritage, passed down through generations. But I always made it clear they were just stories, folklore to help people understand the culture and history of this place. I never believed the darker tales, the ones about creatures that still walked these mountains. That Tuesday morning started like any other. I was checking trail conditions near Cataract Falls when my radio crackled to life. It was Sarah, our main dispatcher. "John, we've got some hikers at the visitor center with a complaint. They want to talk to a ranger about something they heard last night." "What kind of something?" I asked, stepping over a fallen log. "They say it sounded like a woman screaming in the woods, but they think it might have been an animal." I sighed. This happened a lot, especially with city folks who weren't used to wilderness sounds. Probably just a mountain lion. I'll head back and talk to them. The hikers were a young couple from Atlanta, the Hendersons. They looked tired and shaken up. The wife, Lisa, kept glancing toward the windows like she expected something to be watching her. "Tell me what you heard," I said, pulling up a chair. "We were camping at the Abrams Creek shelter," Mark Henderson said. "Around midnight we heard this screaming. It sounded like a woman in terrible pain, like she was being hurt." His wife nodded quickly. But it went on for hours. Hours, Ranger. What kind of animal screams like that for so long? I'd heard mountain lion calls that could sound human-like, especially during mating season. Mountain lions can make sounds that seem almost human. The echo in the valleys can make it seem louder and longer than it really is. This wasn't an echo, Lisa said firmly, and it moved around, like whatever was making the sound was walking in circles around our shelter. That gave me pause. Mountain lions were territorial, but they didn't usually circle human campsites for hours. Still, I'd seen stranger animal behavior. Did you see anything? Any tracks this morning? We left pretty early, Mark admitted. We were too scared to look around much. I took down their contact information and promised to investigate. It was probably nothing, but part of my job was making sure hikers felt safe in the park. After they left, I sat in my office thinking about what my grandmother used to tell me. She'd grown up hearing the old stories from her grandfather, who remembered when Cherokee people still lived freely in these mountains before the government forced them out. One story always stuck with me, about the Wampus cat. According to the legend, there was once a Cherokee woman who broke the sacred laws by spying on the men's ceremonies. As punishment, the medicine men cursed her to become half woman, half cat, forever wandering the mountains as a guardian of the old sacred places. But that was just a story, a way to teach lessons about respect and tradition. I'd never given it much thought beyond its cultural significance. Looking back now, I wish I'd paid more attention to those old warnings. The next morning, I drove out to Abrams Creek to investigate the Hendersons' report. The trail was quiet, just the sound of water running over rocks and birds calling in the trees. Everything seemed normal until I reached the shelter area. That's when I found the tracks. I've been tracking animals my whole life. Growing up, my grandfather taught me to read the forest like a book. These prints were definitely feline, big, round pads with claw marks. But something was off about them. Mountain lion tracks have 4 toes. These had 6. I knelt down and measured them with my pocket ruler. Nearly 6 inches across, which was huge even for a mountain lion. The claw marks were deep, like whatever made them had razor-sharp talons, and they formed a perfect circle around the shelter, just like the Hendersons had described. Weird, I muttered, taking photos with my camera. I followed the tracks into the woods. They led to a game trail that wound up toward the ridge. Normal enough, until the tracks suddenly stopped at the base of a cliff face. I looked up at the sheer rock wall, maybe 200 feet high. No way any normal animal could climb that. But there were claw marks in the rock, deep gouges that went straight up. My radio squawked. "John, you there?" It was Bill Mackenzie, a local farmer whose land bordered the park. I'd known Bill for years, solid, practical man who didn't spook easily. "Yeah, Bill, what's up?" "I need you to come take a look at something. Lost one of my prize cattle last night, and, well, you better see for yourself." Bill's farm was about 10 miles from where I stood. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. The dead cow was in Bill's north pasture, close to the park boundary. One look told me this wasn't a normal predator kill. "Found her this morning," Bill said, his face grim. "Been raising cattle for 30 years, and I never seen anything like this." The cow's throat had been slashed with surgical precision. 3 parallel cuts, clean as a razor. But the strange part was that the body hadn't been eaten. Most of the blood was gone, but the meat was untouched. "What do you think did this?" Bill asked. I examined the wounds more closely. The cuts were too clean for most wild animals. Bears and mountain lions tear their prey. This looked almost deliberate. I don't know, I admitted. Any tracks around? That's the other thing. Bill led me around the body. Look at this. More six-toed prints, bigger than the ones at the shelter. And they didn't approach the cow from ground level. They dropped down from above like whatever killed it had jumped from the trees. You ever hear of anything like this, John? I thought about the Cherokee stories, but shook my head. Probably a rogue mountain lion, maybe diseased or injured, changing its hunting patterns. But even as I said it, I didn't believe it. That evening I was filling out incident reports when my phone rang. It was Tom Phillips, one of our seasonal rangers. John, I'm up at Cades Cove with a group of campers. They're reporting weird sounds, like someone crying. You know anything about this? What kind of crying? Like a woman sobbing, started about an hour ago. It's really spooking the kids. Cades Cove was 15 miles from Abrams Creek. If the same animal was responsible, it was covering a lot of ground. I'll be right there. By the time I reached Cades Cove, it was nearly dark. The camping area was buzzing with nervous activity. Parents were bringing children into their tents early, and I could see people looking toward the tree line with worried expressions. Tom met me at the parking area. It stopped about 10 minutes ago, but everyone's still on edge. Anyone see anything? That's just it. Mrs. Patterson from the RV over there says she saw something moving in the woods. Upright, like a person, but wrong somehow. I interviewed Mrs. Patterson, a grandmother from Kentucky who was camping with her family. It was tall as a person, she said, but it moved like an animal, smooth and quiet, and the eyes, they glowed yellow in the dark. Could have been a bear standing up, I suggested. They do that sometimes. She shook her head firmly. I know what bears look like, young man. This was no bear. I spent the next hour checking the woods around the campground. I found broken branches and disturbed undergrowth, but no clear tracks in the rocky soil. As I was heading back to my truck, I heard it. The crying started low and distant, like someone lost in the woods. But there was something wrong with the sound. Too wild, too mournful. It made the hair on my arms stand up. The crying grew louder, closer. Other campers heard it too. I could see tent lights flicking on all around the cove. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the sound changed. The crying became a scream. Not human, but not quite animal either. It echoed off the mountains, seeming to come from everywhere at once. Every dog in the campground started barking. The scream faded away, leaving an unnatural silence. Even the insects had stopped their nighttime chirping. I stood there in the dark, my flashlight beam trembling slightly, and realized my grandmother's stories might not be just folklore after all. Word spread quickly through the park about the strange incidents. Over the next week, we received reports from hikers across the entire mountain range. Most were similar: screaming sounds, glimpses of something large moving through the trees, and that persistent feeling of being watched. I started carrying my grandfather's old hunting rifle when I went out on patrol. Officially, it was for bear protection. Unofficially, I was starting to think we were dealing with something much worse. The trail cameras were useless. Every time we set them up in areas where sightings occurred, they'd malfunction. Dead batteries, corrupted files, or just complete electronic failure. Our infrared motion sensors picked up heat signatures, but when we reviewed the footage, there was nothing visible on screen. It's like whatever's out there doesn't want to be recorded, Sarah said, looking at another batch of blank files. On Thursday afternoon, everything changed. Rebecca Thompson was an experienced hiker from North Carolina. She'd been planning to do a solo overnight trip to Laurel Falls, an easy trail that hundreds of people hiked every year. She checked in with us at 2 p.m. and was supposed to return by noon the next day. When she didn't show up by 3 p.m., we started getting worried. I led the search team that found her backpack. It was about half a mile from the falls, torn to shreds and scattered across the trail. Deep claw marks had ripped through the heavy canvas like it was tissue paper. "Jesus," whispered Mike Romano, one of our newer rangers. "What could do this to a pack?" We found Rebecca's sleeping bag hanging from a tree branch 20 feet off the ground. Her food was gone, but not eaten, just scattered around like someone had been searching through everything she owned. The strangest thing was the smell. The whole area reeked of something wild and musky, like a zoo animal, but stronger. It made my eyes water. "Look at this," called Janet Torres, our tracking specialist. She was kneeling beside a stream, staring at the mud. More six-toed prints, but these were huge, nearly 8 inches across. And they showed something that made my blood run cold. The creature had been walking upright. We brought in helicopters, search dogs, and 40 volunteers. The dogs were useless. They'd follow the scent trail to a certain point, then refuse to go further. They'd whine and back away, hackles raised, like they sensed a predator that could kill them. On the second day of searching, we found Rebecca. She was alive, sitting in a cave 15 miles from where she'd disappeared. She was unharmed physically, but her eyes had a distant, glassy look that scared me more than any injury would have. "Rebecca," I said gently, crouching down beside her. "Are you okay? We've been looking for you." She stared at me for a long moment, like she wasn't sure I was real. "I don't remember," she said finally. "I was hiking to the falls and then... nothing. How did I get here?" The medical team checked her over. No injuries, no signs of exposure or dehydration. But there were changes that the doctors couldn't explain. Her sense of smell had become incredibly sharp. She could detect scents from hundreds of yards away. Her night vision was so improved that she didn't need a flashlight in the cave. Most disturbing of all, wild animals were drawn to her now. Squirrels, birds, even deer would approach her without fear, like she was one of them. "It marked her," said Joseph Swimmer, an elder from the Cherokee Nation who'd come to help with the search. He was my grandmother's cousin, and one of the few people left who knew the old stories in their original form. "Marked her how?" I asked. "The Wampus cat. When it takes someone but doesn't kill them, it leaves its mark, changes them, makes them part of both worlds, human and animal." I wanted to dismiss his words as superstition, but looking at Rebecca, I couldn't deny that something had fundamentally changed about her. That night, Carl Rodriguez died. Carl was a mountaineering instructor who'd been camping at Russell Field Shelter, experienced, careful, and tough as nails. We found his body the next morning, and it was clear he'd fought hard for his life. The wounds were similar to what I'd seen on Bill's cattle, precise surgical cuts that had drained most of his blood. But Carl's defensive wounds told a story of desperate struggle. He'd managed to cut whatever attacked him. We found dark, sticky blood on his knife that didn't match his own. "Look at the position of the body," Mike pointed out. Carl had been arranged carefully after death. His arms were crossed over his chest, his head pointing toward the east. Stones had been placed around him in a pattern I recognized from my grandmother's descriptions of Cherokee burial rituals. "It's showing respect," I realized. Whatever killed him arranged his body according to Cherokee traditions. The pattern was becoming clear. The creature wasn't just mindlessly attacking people. It was protecting something, following some kind of code or purpose. I started having the dreams that night. I'd see a Cherokee woman running through the mountains, tears streaming down her face. She was beautiful, but terrifying. Her hands had become claws, her teeth were sharp fangs, and her eyes glowed with an unnatural light. In the dreams, she was calling my name. "John Whitehorse," she'd say in a voice like wind through the trees. "You understand. You know why I walk between worlds." I'd wake up with scratches on my arms that hadn't been there when I went to sleep. The attacks escalated over the next few days. Tommy Phillips, a local guide who'd been leading unauthorized night tours of old Cherokee ceremonial sites, was found dead near Spence Field. His body was arranged the same way Carl's had been, but this time there was a message. Animal bones, deer, rabbit, bird, had been carefully arranged to spell out Cherokee words. I called Joseph Swimmer to translate. "Sacred ground violated," he read. "Balance must be restored." "What does that mean?" I asked. Joseph's face was grave. "The tourist trails cross through places that were sacred to our people. Ceremonial grounds where our ancestors held their most important rituals. The Wampus Cat is trying to protect them. But people have been hiking these trails for decades. Why is this happening now? Because now they're not just hiking. They're commercializing the sacred places, turning them into entertainment. The guided night tours, the ghost story walks, the people who come here looking for thrills instead of showing respect." I thought about Tommy Phillips and his unauthorized tours. He'd been charging tourists $50 to take them to Cherokee ceremonial sites after dark, spinning ghost stories and encouraging people to take spiritual selfies at sacred locations. "How do we stop it?" I asked. Joseph was quiet for a long time. "You have to talk to her. You're Cherokee. She might listen to you, but it's dangerous. The Wampus Cat doesn't just kill, John. She can drive people insane, mark them like she marked that girl, or worse." "Worse?" "She can make you like her, caught between worlds forever." That night, I made my decision. I was going to face whatever was hunting in these mountains, and I was going to end this before more people died. I just didn't realize how much it would cost me. I went to Spence Field on the night of the Cherokee harvest moon, just like Joseph Swimmer had suggested. If I was going to meet the Wampus Cat, it would be on ground that was sacred to both of us. The fog was thick that night, rolling through the mountains like living smoke. I'd left my rifle at home and carried only my grandfather's eagle feather and a small bundle of tobacco for offerings. If this creature truly was the guardian spirit from Cherokee stories, weapons would only make things worse. The field was empty and silent when I arrived. Even the insects had gone quiet. I walked to the center of the clearing and sat down cross-legged the way my grandmother had taught me for important conversations with the spirit world. "I'm here," I said aloud. "My name is Jonathan Whitehorse. My grandmother was Mary Swimmer of the Cherokee Nation. I want to talk." The fog swirled around me, growing thicker. The temperature dropped until I could see my breath. Then I heard footsteps in the mist, soft, padding steps that circled around me slowly. "I know you can understand me," I continued. "I know you're protecting the sacred places. But innocent people are dying." The footsteps stopped directly behind me. I felt hot breath on my neck and smelled that wild, musky scent that had been at every attack site. "Turn around, John Whitehorse." The voice was like wind through pine needles, definitely female, but with an inhuman quality that made my skin crawl. I turned slowly. She was beautiful and terrible at the same time. Tall as a person, but built like a big cat, with golden fur covering her arms and legs. Her face was human, a Cherokee woman with high cheekbones and dark eyes, but her teeth were fangs, and her hands ended in long, sharp claws. Most unsettling were her eyes. They glowed with an amber light, and when I looked into them, I could see centuries of loneliness and pain. "You know what I am," she said. "You're Iwa," I said, using the Cherokee name from the old stories. "The woman who was cursed for breaking sacred law." She smiled sadly. I was curious. The men had ceremonies that women couldn't attend, and I wanted to know what secrets they kept. So I disguised myself and spied on them. "And the medicine men caught you. They cursed me to walk between the world of humans and the world of animals forever, to guard the sacred places from those who would violate them, as I had violated their trust." The fog around us began to glow with the same amber light as her eyes. "For 200 years, I've kept the sacred grounds safe. But now," her voice turned angry, "now people come here for entertainment. They take pictures and make noise and treat our ancestors' spirits like tourist attractions." "I understand," I said, "but killing innocent people isn't the answer." Her claws extended, gleaming in the moonlight. "Innocent?" The man who led groups of drunk tourists to ceremony grounds at midnight, telling them lies about Cherokee savagery. The climber who carved his name into the sacred stones. The woman who tried to take artifacts from burial sites. I realized she was talking about the victims. Tommy Phillips with his ghost tours. Carl Rodriguez, who'd been caught vandalizing Cherokee petroglyphs. And Rebecca Thompson, who'd been found with ancient pottery shards in her pack. "They weren't innocent," Iwa continued. "They were violators. And you, John Whitehorse, you work for the government that stole these lands from our people. How innocent are you?" "I'm trying to protect both worlds," I said. "Cherokee heritage and public safety." She laughed, a sound like a mountain lion's scream. "You can't serve two masters. Choose, John. Help me drive the violators away, or become my enemy. What if there's another way? What if we can protect the sacred sites without killing? Speak." I explained my idea. Work with the Park Service and the Cherokee Nation. Create official sacred boundaries that tourists can't cross. Educate visitors about respecting Cherokee culture instead of exploiting it. End the commercialization while keeping the trails safe. Iwa circled me slowly, her claws leaving deep marks in the earth. "And if your government refuses? If they choose profit over respect? Then I'll choose the Cherokee way. But give me a chance to try." She stopped in front of me, so close I could feel the heat radiating from her body. "You would sacrifice your career, your life among humans, if that's what it takes?" For a long moment, we stared at each other. Then she reached out with one clawed hand and touched my forehead. Pain exploded through my skull. Images flooded my mind. Cherokee villages before the removal, sacred ceremonies in hidden valleys, the Trail of Tears, and decades of watching sacred sites be turned into parking lots and gift shops. But along with the pain came something else. A connection to the land that went deeper than anything I'd ever felt. I could sense every animal in the mountains, hear the whispers of Cherokee ancestors, feel the spiritual energy that flowed through the old ceremony grounds. "Now you see as I see," Iwa said. "Now you understand the weight of protecting what is sacred." When the visions faded, I was changed. I could feel it in every cell of my body. Part of me would always belong to the spirit world now. "I'll stop the attacks on innocent people," she promised. "But those who deliberately violate sacred ground will face my judgment. And John Whitehorse, if you break your promise to protect our ancestors' resting places, you will face my judgment too." She began to fade into the mist, becoming transparent. "You have 1 year to prove that humans and spirits can share these mountains in peace. Don't disappoint me." When the fog lifted, I was alone in Spence Field. But I was no longer the same man who'd arrived there. The federal investigation nearly destroyed my life. When I reported what had really happened in the mountains, the Park Service accused me of having a nervous breakdown. They said I'd been under too much stress, that I'd started believing in primitive superstitions and needed psychological evaluation. But the Cherokee Nation stood by me. Joseph Swimmer testified that I'd been fulfilling my cultural obligations to protect sacred sites. Tribal lawyers argued that the attacks had stopped after I'd negotiated with the Wampus Cat, proving that Cherokee spiritual law was real and effective. The legal battle took months, but in the end, we won something important. The Cherokee Nation gained official recognition of sacred sites within the Park boundaries. Tourist access was restricted in sensitive areas, and all commercial tour operators had to complete cultural sensitivity training. I kept my promise to Iwa. Working with Cherokee elders, we identified and protected 18 sacred sites throughout the Smokies. We educated visitors about Cherokee history and traditions, emphasizing respect over entertainment. The Wampus Cat kept her promise too. The attacks stopped completely, except for 3 incidents involving people who deliberately vandalized Cherokee sites, despite the new protections. In each case, the violators were found alive but deeply traumatized, marked the same way Rebecca Thompson had been. They all reported the same thing. A Cherokee woman with glowing eyes who spoke directly into their minds, showing them the true history of the mountains and the consequences of disrespect. As for me, I live between 2 worlds now. I can sense when sacred boundaries are being crossed, feel the distress of the land when it's being harmed, and sometimes hear the voices of Cherokee ancestors on the wind. I never see Iwa directly anymore, but I know she's still out there. Sometimes, on foggy nights when the moon is dark, hikers report glimpses of a tall figure watching them from the ridgelines. Tour guides whisper about the guardian of the Smokies, who protects both the mountains and those who respect them. The official Park Service reports list the incidents as animal attacks by an unidentified large predator, subsequently relocated to a remote area. But the Cherokee people know the truth, and now, so do you. Some spirits are too powerful to be dismissed as folklore. Some guardians are too necessary to be destroyed. And sometimes, the best way to protect the innocent is to respect the sacred. I still work as a park ranger, but now I serve a higher authority than the federal government. Every morning I walk the boundaries between the human world and the spirit world, making sure both remain safe. Because in these ancient mountains, some borders are more important than any law written by humans, and the Wampus Cat is still watching.